Book 1, Chapter 10 The Night of Death. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Cloudhawk's sleep was not a restful one again. In his dreams, he once more returned to that tunnel which led to hell. The area around him was littered in body parts and severed limbs, and the blood-soaked bodies on the ground were all twitching. The massacred scavengers all began to rise to their feet. Some of them had acid-eaten faces that had been rendered unrecognizable, while others had their heads partially caved in from stone warhammer blows. Others had actually been bisected. All of them slowly began to gather together and swarm around Cloudhawk like angry, vengeful specters. No. No. Cloudhawk frantically tried to flee, but his legs seemed to be glued in place. It was as though he was stuck to the thick, congealed blood on the ground. Right at this moment, a scavenger clutching a short sword hobbled over in an extremely ungainly manner. His right leg had been cut off, while a terrifying, gaping wound was on his neck. The wound was so deep that his head was half falling off his neck, and his eyes were filled with viperous hate. "Why didn't you save me?" The scavenger's voice was more dreadful than the wailing of all the wraiths of hell, and he lifted up his short sword and delivered a hacking blow. Terrified, Cloudhawk leaned sideways to dodge, and right in that moment, a spear suddenly flew over from somewhere and pierced through his chest. The second attacker was a mutant that looked fairly young. One of his eyes had been stabbed through, leaving only one good eye remaining on his smiling, savage, and terrifying face. Cloudhawk fell onto the ground, completely unable to move as blood surged out of him like a geyser, draining his strength away with it. The scavengers and the sweepers all disappeared. Moments later, a chubby white man and a muscular black man led a group of chatting and laughing mercenaries over. They didn't seem to even see the youth who was fighting for his life on the ground. Cloudhawk reached out towards them. "Save me." Their gazes were filled with disdain. "Useless piece of crap." A mercenary hawked and spat, a look of disdain on his face. It was as though he had stepped onto a pile of excrement and wanted to give vent to his annoyance. All of the mercenaries cursed as they moved to circle around Cloudhawk. Cloudhawk just lay there on the ground, powerless. His eyes slowly began to turn blank as he felt his body growing colder and colder. He wanted to reach out and grab something, anything, but his determination and his will were both slipping away from him. It was a terrifying feeling, a feeling of utter despair. His body became ice cold, then started to decay and emanate an aura of foulness. Countless bugs and worms began to bore through his corpse, which eventually became a feast for rats. But even when nothing was left of Cloudhawk besides a skeleton, his will and his mind remained intact. Endless despair and grief filled every single bone, surrounding his corpse as it sank deeper and deeper into an endless darkness. Creak. Creak. Cloudhawk was suddenly able to make out a vague sound. It was like a bucket of cold water had been poured over him, and he was instantly jolted awake from that terrifying nightmare. His entire body was covered with cold sweat. He had died such a miserable, meaningless death. That feeling of utter despair, of slipping into that eternal darkness, that sorrowful feeling of utter powerlessness, even now, his heart was pounding. What a terrifying nightmare that had been. It was not yet dawn. The night was so dark, everything seemed to blur together. The entire outpost had been securely locked down, and everything was so stiflingly silent that he felt as though he could barely breathe. Creak. Creak. That sound rang out again. It was a tiny, almost unnoticeable sound that nonetheless stabbed against his psyche like a dagger. It was this very sound which had startled Cloudhawk awake, and at this moment goosebumps began to appear throughout his body once more. He could sense that danger was enveloping him. Something had appeared in the cracks of the bolted door, something which sparkled with cold metallic light within the darkness. It was the thin edge of a knife. The knife slowly, silently extended its way through the seams of the door, then slid upwards until it hit the wooden bolt. The knife stayed there for 2 brief seconds, then slowly began to rise upwards once more and lift the bolt up. Was it one of the mercenaries? No way. Why would one of them come at a time like this and use such a stealthy method to open the door? Cloudhawk's heart was pounding so hard, he felt as though it was about to burst out of his chest. He hastily gripped the short sword lying next to the bed, his hands still slick with cold sweat from the nightmare. He hid the short sword underneath him, then curled around it. He breathed deeply, forcing himself to relax. His muscles however remained taut, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. This midnight intruder was clearly quite practiced in his movements. His knife easily lifted the wooden bolt up without causing much sound at all. He pushed the door open by just a crack, but did not immediately charge inside. This was an extremely experienced predator. Without a doubt, he was currently scanning the insides of the room to assess the situation. Cloudhawk didn't want to expose the fact that he was awake, and so he just lay there on the bed without moving, maintaining an even breathing pattern as though he was still asleep. After 4 or 5 moments of silence, a long blade reached through the crack and pushed the door open, letting in the moonlight from the outside. This midnight trespasser was fairly tall and muscular, and he had a head full of tousled hair. He held a knife in his left hand while he gripped a long machete in his right. The blade of the machete seemed to be covered with many dark red splotches, and it radiated a faint but sickening stench of blood. The machete's edge was extremely sharp, and it flashed with a cold light that warned of impending danger and death. He's here to kill me. Cloudhawk's mind was in a state of chaos right now. He was filled with horror, fear, rage, but mostly confusion. Oh, fuck. Who is this guy? This is my first day in the outpost. Why did someone choose to attack me like this? Cloudhawk's keen sense for danger was screaming to him that this midnight trespasser was a dangerous man. If he tried to battle the man head-on, he'd probably fail. He had to seize a chance to counter and kill the man. 5 meters. 4 meters. 3 meters. The midnight trespasser walked as silently as a cat, causing no sound at all as he slowly, steadily inched his way forwards. He slowly, steadily raised his right arm up high, then brought his machete downwards in a vicious chop that flashed through the darkness of the night. This entire time, he didn't display even the slightest hint of anger or hatred. It was as though he was chopping down at a wooden puppet rather than a human being. Whoosh! Cloudhawk instantly rolled sideways, letting the machete nearly nick his face as it hacked into his bed. If he had been just a second slower, it would have been his head. Cloudhawk then launched himself off his bed with his 2 legs, bursting forth with all of his strength. Faced with Cloudhawk's sudden spring assault, the man didn't hesitate for even a second. He decisively let go of his machete, then managed to dodge Cloudhawk's sudden attack with almost supernatural agility. In the exact same instant that he dodged, he sent the knife in his right hand towards Cloudhawk, flashing like a streak of cold light. He was simply much too fast. Not only was he an experienced hunter, he was also an experienced killer. His strength, his speed, his agility, his response time, his combat experience, his mental toughness, all of these things had clearly been honed through long experience. How could a half-grown kid who grew up in the ruins on garbage possibly be a match for him? Cloudhawk knew from the minute he missed his attack that he was finished. That cold streak of light moved straight towards Cloudhawk's throat. There was no wasted motion, no flowery flourishes, it was a strike that was both fast and vicious, and also incredibly accurate. The knife was sharp enough to easily tear through skin and flesh alike, then saw through his arteries as easily as sawing through noodles. Cloudhawk felt as though everything was beginning to move in slow motion. Although he had faced death on numerous occasions in the past, each time he had been in a state of utter terror and panic. He had never faced death with such alertness and mental clarity as he was now. He could literally see death coming for him but was unable to do anything about it at all. He had finally been able to escape his status as a lowly scavenger and the ruins. He hadn't yet had the chance to grow strong, to gain freedom and independence, to take control over his own destiny. Was it going to be like the dream? Was he really going to die a meaningless and despair-filled death? No. He couldn't die. Not like this. Cloudhawk let out a bestial growl, a growl filled with untamed wildness and rage. A powerful desire to stay alive burst forth from his breast, and as it did it seemed to form a resonance with something else in his chest. Instantly, a surge of fiery strength and frenzied determination filled his entire body, almost as though some invisible power was lending Cloudhawk a hand. With it, Cloudhawk dodged the incoming knife with preternatural agility, suffering just a slight nick in the skin that left only the tiniest of marks. The trespasser was rendered speechless. How did his target, this kid, suddenly seem to transform into someone else entirely? However, he remained a calm, composed, and highly experienced hunter. He was able to compartmentalize his surprise and prevent it from affecting his movements. His knife didn't pause at all, and in his hands it seemed like a living thing as it curved backwards and snaked out a beautiful but deadly butterfly strike that flashed in the dark night. It didn't matter how agile or nimble his prey was. In the end, it was nothing more than a weak little kid. These few brief exchanges had immediately let the trespasser know just how weak Cloudhawk was, and he held the kid in no regard at all. He decided to finish things with his next attack by just cutting the kid's throat, and his movements grew faster and faster. Just as the sharp knife was about to kiss the kid's throat, whap! A clear sound rang out, and the dancing light of the knife suddenly vanished. A deceivingly delicate hand had reached out with lightning speed, then clamped itself around the trespasser's wrist with far more speed and power than it had a right to have. The trespasser felt as though his wrist had been caught in a metal vise. He was actually unable to shake free of that skinny little hand's grip. "You want to kill me?" The kid's irises were completely bloodshot, making them look like the eyes of a demon. He looked completely possessed, and not a hint of anything which could be described as rational thought was apparent in his gaze. The trespasser suddenly began to feel a hint of fear. This was no weak youth. This was a berserk animal. "You want to kill me?" The first time the youth had said these words, it had been in the form of a question. This time, it came in the form of a furious, declarative shout. The youth's handsome face was already twisted into a mask of terrifying rage, and he suddenly tightened his grip. Crack! The youth broke the visitor's wrist. The trespasser let out an agonized howl, but it only lasted for half a second. In the same instant that Cloudhawk broke the trespasser's wrist, he stabbed out with his short sword at several times his previous speed and with 10 times his previous savagery. The blade of the short sword tore into the trespasser's skin, then dug into his lungs. It felt as though a block of ice had penetrated the trespasser's body, causing it to instantly turn as cold as ice. Cloudhawk immediately pulled the short sword out, and as he did so he tore through a beating, pulsating organ. When the sword came out, with it came the hunter's blood, vitality, and strength. Cloudhawk's face was bathed in the trespasser's spurting blood, and the blood was both warm and foul-smelling. And yet, Cloudhawk wasn't nauseated at all. In fact, he actually felt more excitement than anything else. A single wild, frenzied thought filled every corner of his mind. Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! The short sword was of fairly low quality. As a result, on Cloudhawk's 5th stab it was no longer able to endure the violent force its master was applying to it, and it snapped off inside the target's body. As for the hilt, it fell straight to the ground. Cloudhawk's entire body felt so hot, it was like he was being burned alive. It was like the eruption of a volcano that had been slumbering for 1,000,000 years. His mind was filled with nothing save the desire to kill and destroy. He was completely unable to suppress those feelings in his heart. He wanted to bellow, to howl, to ruin and destroy everything he could see. What is going on? What the hell is wrong with me? Cloudhawk knew that he was at the very brink of madness. With the last bit of clarity left to him, he tore off the strange stone and tossed it to one side. As soon as the stone left him, he immediately regained his normal faculties. There really was something wrong with that rock. By now, Cloudhawk had a rough idea as to what was going on. Within the rock, there seemed to reside an ancient mind or an ancient will, one which had most likely been left behind by its previous master. Through methods which Cloudhawk could not understand or even imagine, the stone's former master had imprinted his own will, mind, and possibly even energy inside of that stone. The reason he had done so was to ensure that, in certain special circumstances, the stone would have a major impact on Cloudhawk's life. This was what had happened during the previous night. That was what had happened just now as well. The seemingly ordinary rock once more returned to its ordinary, dull appearance. It seemed to possess no extraordinary attributes at all and looked as plain could be. Cloudhawk picked the stone up, focusing on it several times but still gaining no idea as to how he was supposed to use it. Where exactly did it come from? What exactly was it? And what sort of a person had left that brutal, terrifying, and powerful will behind within the stone? This stone was definitely an extraordinary one. Perhaps, in the future, it would once more be of assistance to him. In the end, Cloudhawk decided to keep it in his possession but also decided that he couldn't let anyone learn about it at all. Book 1, Chapter 11 Training. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Dawn. Finally, the long-awaited mercenaries came looking for him. Motherfucker, what's he doing here? That's Skinner. I was just drinking with him the other week. Skinner's the owner of a butcher shop. His store was probably running low again, so he came out last night to try and find a few piggies to butcher to replenish his stock. Mad Dog eyed the corpse on the ground. Although they were old acquaintances, Mad Dog didn't show the slightest bit of grief or pity at all. It was as though he was looking at a dead rat that had invaded his property. Your luck sure is shit, kid. Who would have thought something like this would happen to you on your first day? By my count, at least 80 little piggies like you have ended up dead by Skinner's hands. The owner of a butcher shop. So this was one of those detestable meat merchants. Cloudhawk had thought them to only exist in the wastelands. Who would have thought that they would exist in the outposts as well? Then again, I have to say, the fucker might have been useless, but not so useless as to end up like this. Mad Dog glanced at Cloudhawk in a very puzzled manner. Why aren't you dead instead of him? And what the fuck was that supposed to mean? Is he suggesting that I shouldn't be alive? Although Cloudhawk was enraged by Mad Dog's attitude, he didn't dare reveal the truth behind what happened the previous night, and so he just gave a rather vague explanation for what had happened. You pretended to be asleep, then suddenly shanked the fucker in the heart. Mad Dog thought it through carefully, then decided that it was plausible. The corpse on the ground had probably just underestimated the kid too much. Next time, hang a bell on the door or set up a simple trap. Shit like this happens every night at Black Flag Outpost. You were lucky this time, but you might not be so lucky next time. As soon as Mad Dog finished speaking, he turned and prepared to leave. Wait a sec. Cloudhawk didn't understand why all of this had happened. What should I do with the corpse? Your spoils of war. You decide. You can either sell it to the black market or use it yourself. I recommend you nail the head outside your door. Skinner's head will probably scare a few people off, making it easier for you to fall asleep at night. As for the rest of his body, well, he spent most of his life skinning others and selling their meat. It's now his own turn to be skinned eaten by someone else. The ugly, swarthy bastard spoke in a very matter-of-fact manner. Cloudhawk, however, revealed a look of revulsion upon hearing it. You really are a damn rookie. Mad Dog spat disdainfully. Check out that horrified look on your face. You probably wouldn't even have the balls to taste human meat. Just send the corpse to Mantis or give it to Woola. They like this type of present. Enough of this crap. Next time some small-time shit like this happens, deal with it yourself instead of bothering me about it. Fuck me, what a waste of time. Mad Dog continued to curse and insult Cloud Hawk as he left the room. At the doorway, he suddenly turned his head and said, "Come to the training area at noon. You have work to do." Cloud Hawk silently swore Mad Dog up and down at least 10 times before calming down. Still, he still had a job to carry out. Cloud Hawk couldn't help but shiver when he thought of how Woola slavered and drooled while staring at him, and so he decided it was best to send the corpse to Mantis instead. Of the 3 mercenary captains, Mantis seemed to be the only one who seemed normal. First, Cloud Hawk stripped the corpse of its clothes and weapons. They might be of use in the future, after all. Cloud Hawk then dragged the corpse out of his room. No one on the streets reacted to him dragging a corpse around. In fact, no one even glanced a second time at him. Faced with utter indifference, Cloud Hawk was actually able to relax a little bit. Mantis resided within a large, stand-alone house which was virtually the largest building the mercenaries had. Cloud Hawk couldn't help but feel quite curious. It seemed as though Mantis never went out on missions. Why, then, did he hold such a high status amongst the mercenaries? When the puzzled Cloud Hawk entered Mantis' residence, his eyes damn near popped out. When he saw what was happening before him, for a moment he felt certain that he had to have entered the wrong place. This was no residence, it was a slaughterhouse. 5 or 6 corpses lay sprawled in various locations. Some had their hands lopped off, some had missing legs, and some had their skulls split open. As for Mantis, he wore a pair of gloves on his hands and was busy carving open the chest and the abdomen of one of the corpses, using a pair of sharp surgical scalpels with precision. In just a few brief moments, he drew out a bloody organ from within the chest cavity. This sight made Cloud Hawk's hair stand on end. No wonder this guy was named Mantis. He suppressed his nervousness and called out, "CC Captain." No response. Mantis continued to carefully inspect the organ in his hands. When he found the unusual mutations he was searching for, he used his scalpels to cut them off bit by bit, then stored them into a small glass jar. The surrounding area was actually filled with large jars, and the jars in turn were filled with many human organs held in preservative fluids. Others were filled with strange plant rooms, and there was also a single strange eyeball that was absolutely chilling to behold. What was Cloud Hawk supposed to do? Neither leaving nor staying seemed appropriate, but he really didn't want to stay here for a second longer than necessary. A fresh one. After finishing his work on the mutated parts, Mantis turned to give the new corpse a cold glance. He had yet to so much as look at Cloud Hawk himself. "Put it here," he said, clearing away a table. Cloud Hawk hurriedly lifted the corpse onto the table. "Can I leave now?" Mantis ignored him as he briefly scanned the corpse. His experience in human anatomy told him right away that this was an agility metahuman. Agility metahumans had higher synaptic response times, giving them higher reaction speeds and greater agility than others. It also gave them a certain degree of physical strength. Humans like him would be able to move very quickly, respond very quickly, and unleash sudden bursts of power. Mantis himself was an extremely high-class agility metahuman. The corpse before him wasn't nearly as high-class, but there was no way an ordinary human being would have been able to handle it. Mantis raised his head to glance at Cloud Hawk, who was standing nearby like a block of wood. Mantis asked coldly, "You killed him?" Yeah, I killed him." Cloud Hawk felt goosebumps when Mantis stared at him like this. He immediately repeated to Mantis the story he had told Mad Dog earlier. "I guess I was lucky. That's why I made it out alive." "Is that so?" Mantis' cold gaze seemed to see straight through Cloud Hawk. Of the 3 captains of Tartarus, Cloud Hawk felt that Mantis was the most unfathomable of them all. Cloud Hawk swallowed some saliva. If there's nothing else, I'm going to leave." But Mantis had another idea. "Stop right there." Mantis remained as taciturn as always, unwilling to say a single unnecessary word. He handed a scalpel over to Cloud Hawk, then said, "Dissect him." Cloud Hawk thought that he might be hearing things. He had grown up in the wastes and so didn't fear corpses, but to personally dissect one was still a bit too much. What the hell was wrong with Mantis? What was the point of dissecting so many corpses? As Cloud Hawk hesitated, a cold, murderous intent began to radiate outwards from Mantis. Cloud Hawk felt a powerful sense of danger, a sensation so strong as to make it hard for him to even breathe. This feeling was completely different from the feeling he had last night. The feeling Mantis gave him was that there was absolutely no chance he would be able to beat Mantis. Cloud Hawk had the strange feeling that if he rejected this request, Mantis would be able to instantly slit his throat using that scalpel without even giving him a chance to say a single word. All right. Cloud Hawk forced himself to pick up that scalpel and other instruments, such as tweezers. He cut into the corpse in accordance with Mantis' instructions. Mantis just stood there like a frozen statue, issuing clipped and succinct orders to tell Cloud Hawk what to do. Cloud Hawk actually began to understand how the human body was constructed. Most likely, Mantis was training him to be able to help out better in the future. A few hours later, Cloud Hawk was finally permitted to leave, and he fled from Mantis' workroom as though his life depended on it. This morning had been an absolute nightmare. Fuck. That freak. That pervert. That skin-peeling, flesh-cutting, ugh. Cloud Hawk had a strong feeling of nausea. Several minutes passed before he was able to recover. Now, he finally understood that none of the three captains were normal. Oh. He suddenly realized that he had almost forgotten the orders which Mad Dog had given him. Mad Dog was a brutally bad-tempered man. If Cloud Hawk pissed him off, he'd snap Cloud Hawk's legs without even blinking. Cloud Hawk wouldn't dare to ignore his orders, and so he immediately ran towards the training area. This was the place where the Tartarus mercenaries spent their time training, and as soon as Cloud Hawk entered he heard Woola's frenzied baying. The Hammut had been tied to the entranceway, and his ugly, savage gaze was once more fixed upon Cloud Hawk. Bloody spots could be seen surrounding his jaws, as though he had just enjoyed a feast not too long ago. What the hell took you so long? Mad Dog had a seriously pissed off look in his eyes, but he turned and snapped to the training mercenaries, "Enough. Get over here. Your sparring partner has just arrived." Sparring partner. What the hell did that mean? Listen up. This kid is a recovery meta, but he's a fairly crappy one. Don't hit him too hard and don't cripple him. Mad Dog didn't give Cloud Hawk any explanations at all as he pointed to one of the mercenaries. "Cook, you go first." The mercenary named Cook was a man that looked as muscular as a grizzly bear. He immediately walked out with an excited look on his face as he eyed Cloud Hawk with a judging gaze. "Boss, you guys are absolutely brilliant. You knew how bored we were hitting sandbags, so you found us a meat-bag to hit instead. Hitting someone who can dodge and scream is a hell of a lot more fun." Cloud Hawk was starting to have a bad feeling about this. But before he could say anything, Mad Dog just said impatiently, "Cut the fucking crap and start already." Just as Cloud Hawk was about to protest, Cook charged towards him while delivering an elbow strike that knocked Cloud Hawk to the ground. Cloud Hawk instantly felt dazed, and his body felt like a glass bottle that had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Oh, fuck me." Mad Dog began to curse loudly as his ugly, scar-covered face twisted with rage. Spittle flew from his mouth as he howled, "Can you be any more fucking useless? Stand up. Stand up. Stand up." All the other mercenaries chanted these words towards him as well. Finally, Cloud Hawk knew what being a meat-bag meant, and he also finally realized the real reason behind Slyfox's decision to recruit him into their base. Once again, that despicable fatso had deceived him. Right at this moment, Cook delivered a furious kick right towards him. This time, Cloud Hawk slanted his body sideways and managed to dodge. Mad Dog narrowed his eyes upon seeing this. Ha! That was odd. Since when did the kid's reaction time improve that much? Cloudhawk himself had also realized that after what had happened the previous night, his reaction speed and his strength both had seemed to improved. This was probably something caused by that stone, and it wasn't the right time to let others know about his improvement. When Cook attacked with a blow from his knee, Cloudhawk elected not to dodge and instead used his hands to block it. Bang! He was sent flying into the air as though he really was nothing more than a sandbag. Mad Dog spat on the ground, then shook his head disdainfully as he watched Cook beat down on Cloudhawk for 10 full minutes. Cloudhawk didn't launch so much as a single counter attack, instead, he just used his arms to protect his vital areas. The mercenaries were actually all quite surprised. The kid looked scrawny and weak, but his body was pretty tough. No matter how hard Cook hit him, he was still able to crawl back up. Cook, you move too slow and your blows aren't concentrated enough. You are a strength meta, but you hit like a little bitch. You really are fucking useless. Mad Dog cursed him out, then snapped, just fuck off. Next. Cook couldn't help but mumble unhappily to himself. Although he wasn't as freakishly strong as Mad Dog, he was still able to easily snap an opponent's bones with a single punch. He didn't use his full strength because he wasn't supposed to break the newbie, right? Cloudhawk ended up being utterly and ruthlessly dominated for an entire afternoon. Hours passed before the mercenary training finally came to an end. Cloudhawk went forward, claiming his ration of bread for the day. When Slyfox saw Cloudhawk's black eyes and bruised face, he roared with laughter and patted Cloudhawk on the shoulders. Not bad, kid. You didn't disappoint me after all. Your body is pretty tough and can take a beating. Here, have an extra piece of bread. Keep up the good work tomorrow. Oh, right, later tonight, I'll teach you how to repair our car and how to maintain our weapons. Feeding Woola is part of your job as well. In the future, you will be responsible for all of these tasks. Cloudhawk was really starting to regret coming here. This fat bastard, Slyfox, really had chosen the perfect nickname for himself. He swindled others without even blinking or blushing. He had first chosen for Cloudhawk to serve as live bait, now, he was using Cloudhawk as a human punching bag. Was there no low to which this bastard wouldn't stoop? If Cloudhawk had known that life in the outpost would be like this, he would have chosen to continue foraging for survival in the ruins instead. That look in your eyes suggests that you are quite unhappy. Slyfox took a puff on his cigarette, then put on a worldly air as he said, "Listen, young man. Learning how to take a punch is training, you know. All metas have to continuously improve and grow stronger. Strength metas need to train in strength, agility metas need to train their agility, control metas will train in control, and recovery metas like you have to train your recovery abilities, right? Me having them beat the piss out of you is my way of showing how much I care. This torture you are going through is just training. Value this opportunity. When the time comes, I promise I'll take you out on a mission with us. You still think I'll trust you in the future? Just fuck off and die already." Cloudhawk really wanted to punch the man in his fat face. Go out on missions. Fuck that. Cloudhawk had nearly died due to Slyfox's machinations on the last mission. Even if Slyfox really did take him out on a mission, there was no way it would be with anything even resembling good intentions. Cloudhawk just grabbed the bread, then turned and left without saying a word. Slyfox just grinned as he watched Cloudhawk leave, continuing to puff on his cigarette. Kid's got a bit of an attitude after all. Ahahaha. When night descended, Cloudhawk's entire body was drenched in machine oil as well as a claw mark left behind by Woola. Finally, he made it back to his own residence. Only then did he realize that none of the blood had been washed off, and it had all congealed on the ground, filling the air in the room with a breathtaking stench. Cloudhawk was both tired and hungry. He was in no mood to do any cleaning, and so he just fell onto his bed and immediately passed out. Book 1, Chapter 12 Life in the Base. You are listening at novelfull.audio. There would always be differences between fantasy and reality. Many people would often pursue their dreams with the utmost of vigor, only to find when they actually realized those dreams that they weren't everything they had been cracked up to be. This was because the best parts of those dreams all stemmed from the human imagination itself. Cloudhawk now truly understood the meaning behind that saying. Diggers were able to eat well, dress warmly, had places to stay, and didn't have to live in fear, right? That was what Cloudhawk once believed, but upon actually entering the outpost he realized that excavators didn't live easier lives than scavengers at all. Each day, when they opened their eyes, they would celebrate the fact that they had survived yet another night. No one had slit their throats while they were dreaming. They would then begin to carry out their weary tasks, with some of them being assigned to act as sparring partners, also known as human punching bags. They also had an endless supply of miscellaneous tasks to carry out. Cloudhawk had to serve as Mantis' helper, feed Woola, repair their tools, and engage in other types of hard labor as well. One could imagine how miserable life like this was. The mercenaries were all highly experienced experts, and under their tender ministrations Cloudhawk's face became perpetually bruised and swollen. Thankfully, his fairly strong recovery abilities meant that so long as the injuries weren't too serious, he'd be able to recover from most of the wounds after a good night's rest. Alas, the next day the beatings would continue. As time went on, Cloudhawk discovered a secret about himself. His speed, agility, and control seemed to be improving every single day. Although the rate at which they were improving wasn't that fast, he really was growing stronger by the day. This fact alone was enough to surprise and delight Cloudhawk. This meant that the power he had absorbed wasn't just a recovery power. It meant that the abilities ignited within him had vastly exceeded his expectations, and that he wouldn't just be a useless punching bag for the rest of his life. This transformation was most likely the result of that mysterious stone. Alas, no matter what Cloudhawk tried, the rock remained a completely inert rock that didn't respond to anything at all. Cloudhawk had no choice but to once more wear it around his neck, keeping it with him at all times in the hopes that he would find a way to actively use the stone in the future. Day by day, night by night, Cloudhawk gradually grew accustomed to this tough, toilsome life in Black Flag Outpost. And to be honest, being treated as a punching bag every day wasn't completely without benefits. Just as the fat Sly Fox had said, as he repeatedly recovered from his injuries his recovery abilities began to improve dramatically as well. The more beatings his body took, the tougher it actually became. In addition, Cloudhawk became more and more familiar with the techniques and tricks the mercenaries used when attacking, and he could also sense that his own speed and reaction times were improving. During the last few sessions, he had been itching to give the mercenaries a good tussle. In the end, he had still chosen to hold back, unwilling to reveal his current abilities without a good reason. For now, he didn't want anyone to know about his secret. Neither Sly Fox nor Mad Dog were reliable, after all. Being a sparring partner was just part of his life. The mercenaries were determined to squeeze every last drop of value out of him, and as the lowest-ranking member of Tartarus it was his job to fetch water, carry dishes, sweep the ground, wash their clothes, empty the chamber pots, sharpen their weapons, carry heavy loads, perform maintenance on their vehicle. He did everything. Mantis often had Cloudhawk come to him and be his assistant. At first, Cloudhawk found this job to be extremely uncomfortable. By now, he understood the human body like the back of his head, and was able to dissect a body and draw out its internal organs with his eyes closed. As for his relationship with Woola. At first, Woola would chase him around and attempt to bite him every time Woola saw him. Now, after feeding Woola for so long, the relationship between Cloudhawk and Woola slowly became more peaceful. Over the course of this month, Cloudhawk slowly became a real member of this organization. The other mercenaries were starting to actually like the kid. He was stubborn and pugnacious, and every day he did his job in a very sulky manner, but he still did what he was supposed to do, and did it well. With him around, everyone in the mercenary company was able to relax much more than before. Where would they ever find another slave laborer like this? Although Cloudhawk still didn't have much status in Tartarus and wasn't allowed to eat with the others, and although he still had to live outside in that small room, everyone's attitude towards him had noticeably improved. They no longer treated him with the same contempt as they had in the past. Every day, Cloudhawk endured beatings from the mercenaries, endured Woola chasing him around the yard and biting him, and endured all the dirty jobs which had been foisted upon him. He was someone who had grown up in the ruins. Life there had given him a tenacious, unyielding spirit. He was being treated in a way which no normal person could possibly endure, and he would bitch and moan about it every day, but he was also able to grit his teeth and bear it. There was just one thing he couldn't endure any longer. Hunger. He was starving. Cloudhawk was beginning to realize that as his body was slowly getting stronger, his need for food was beginning to increase as well. As for that damnable, stingy Sly Fox, he hadn't improved Cloudhawk's living conditions at all. Those 2 or 3 pieces of bread Cloudhawk was given each day was simply not enough to fill his stomach. All Cloudhawk could do was occasionally scarf down some of the scraps left behind by the other mercenaries. However, that was quite rare. What was much more common was Cloudhawk being ordered around by the 3 captains while on an empty stomach. This sort of life went on for a full month. One could imagine how sour Cloudhawk felt about it all. If it hadn't been for the 10+ years of life in the ruins teaching him tenacity and patience, Cloudhawk would have blown a gasket and left long ago. Cloudhawk knew that he couldn't leave yet. Although life in Black Flag Outpost was tough, at least it was comparatively regimented and secure. For once, he was fairly free this afternoon. Cloudhawk's only assignment was to clean Woola's kennel, in other words, to sweep away Woola's dung. While working, he pinched his nose in disgust as he said, "Can you stop shitting in the kennel? That's so disgusting." Woola had been relaxing off to one side, soaking in some sun. Upon hearing Cloudhawk dare to lecture him, Woola sat up and flexed all 6 limbs, then stared at Cloudhawk's behind with his red, ape-like eyes. Woola bared his teeth and let out a growl, as though he was about to charge forwards and give Cloudhawk a bite. All right. Just pretend I didn't say anything." Cloudhawk's butt clenched involuntarily. He really was afraid of this irascible creature, who had caused him no small amount of pain in recent days. Woola was actually a bit more powerful in combat than most of the mercenaries, and was probably second to only the 3 captains themselves. Although he wasn't that intelligent, he was easily enraged. He wasn't someone you wanted to piss off. "You can shit where you like, Lord." Woola let out a burp, then once more lay down to enjoy the sun. Just as Cloudhawk dumped the disgusting sack of dung into their garbage pile, he suddenly felt his head grow dizzy as his stomach clenched hard. That omnipresent sense of hunger suddenly began to make itself known once more, and Cloudhawk felt as though every single cell in his body was crying out for sustenance and drawing as much energy as it could from him. This was a simply indescribable form of torment. Although scavengers were very good at enduring hunger, Cloudhawk's body had slowly improved to the point where the hunger pains were now 10 times worse than they had been before. Cloudhawk licked his parched lips, then raised his head to stare at the clouds in the skies. His mood became complicated once more. He had risked everything to escape being a scavenger. Was it all for the sake of carrying water for others and cleaning up their dung? Did these guys want for him to be their errand boy for the rest of his life? Was his only purpose in Tartarus to be a human punching bag? These were questions which Cloudhawk had asked himself repeatedly during this past month in Black Flag Outpost. He wanted to go out on missions like the other mercenaries, because those who went out on missions would be able to earn more food. However, all he could do was fantasize about it. In the eyes of Sly Fox and the other mercenaries, he was nothing more than a useless recovery meta, right? Cloudhawk touched his dry, parched skin. Instead of just thinking about it, he should go ahead and do something about it. He decided it was time for him to go look for some food. There was no way he'd find anything in the mercenary base, and so his only choice was to go try his luck elsewhere. For example, maybe he would be able to dig up a few tubers or find some bugs to eat. Although he wouldn't be able to fill himself up, he'd at least be able to relieve the hunger. If he could catch a few rats, that'd be even better. It had been quite some time since he had eaten any meat. Cloudhawk's idea wasn't a bad one. Unfortunately, it was almost guaranteed that he'd fail. Black Flag Outpost had a total of 20,000 people, and the vast majority of them were in a state that was as bad or worse than that of the scavengers. As a result, virtually everything that was edible in the outposts had long ago been devoured by others. The most likely end result was that he'd exhaust himself looking for food, with the only reward being disappointment and even more hunger. Cloudhawk was wandering around in a rather confused fashion, so hungry that he very nearly passed out. Right at this moment, a notice board in front of an inn suddenly attracted his attention. It read, "Recruiting temporary workers. For 2 hours of work, you can earn 5 strings of rat jerky." Cloudhawk's heart clenched hard as he stared at those crooked words. He could hardly believe what he was saying. 5 strings of rat meat for just 2 hours of work. By comparison, the Tartarus mercenaries were giving him scraps fit for beggars. Cloudhawk was rather intrigued, but he was also nervous. His past experience was warning him that nothing in the world ever came cheap. Whenever you wanted something, you would need to pay a corresponding price. "Hey kid. You over there. Yeah, you." Right at this moment, a man with a splotchy red nose noticed Cloudhawk's interest in the sign. The man's eyes lit up and he rose to his feet and called out, "Come here." Cloudhawk hesitated for a moment, then walked over. "My name is Rednose. Heard of me?" Cloudhawk shook his head. "No." "Wonderful." The chubby red-nosed man let out a happy laugh that sounded warm and friendly. "You hungry, kid?" Cloudhawk nodded. "Need a job?" Cloudhawk nodded again. "Ahaha, then you came at just the right moment. The terms of the deal are pretty clear. You know how to read, right? Then I won't waste any time repeating the terms." As Rednose spoke, he pulled out a sheaf of wrinkly paper and put it on the table. "Just do a fingerprint here." Cloudhawk was so hungry that his vision was going blurry. He couldn't clearly make out all the content on that paper, and before he had a chance to react, the red-nosed man grabbed his hand and pressed it down upon the paper, leaving a fingerprint behind on it. "You are now in my employ, starting now." Rednose gestured to a black man standing nearby. "Take him in." Cloudhawk was completely confused. He had no idea as to what was going on, but the red-nosed proprietor seemed like a fairly nice guy. It was just 2 hours of work, right? How bad could it possibly be? Any job was worth 5 strips of rat meat. When he entered the inn-house, it was like entering a completely different world. All types of colored light were flashing before him, and hard rock music was blasting everywhere along with the screams of the crowd. Everywhere here was dancing wildly, and the air around them was filled with the scent of cheap cigarettes and even cheaper liquor. What attracted Cloudhawk's attention the most was the simple, ugly-looking platform located in the very center of the room. This was a raised platform that was made out of wood and surrounded by hemp rope. It looked like a dueling ring, and the wooden floorboards of the ring were stained in blood. Right at this moment, several half-naked women were furiously scrubbing away at that blood. Moments later, a seductive woman slowly began to walk towards the platform. Catcalls and whistles rang out from around her, and the entire area began to grow even more chaotic. The hard rock music, alcohol, smokes, women, all of these things stimulated male hormones. Cloudhawk had never been to a place like this before. Everything around him seemed fresh and exciting. He had no idea what he was going to be facing next. Book 1, Chapter 13 The Bloody Ring. You are listening at novelfull.audio. By wasteland standards, the woman on the platform was absolutely a great beauty. Although her skin was rather coarse, she had a superb figure, and the cleavage she was revealing was enough to drive any man wild with fantasies. She wore very little, just enough to cover her most sensitive parts while occasionally revealing them, and her slender legs were just barely covered by ragged silk stockings. From top to bottom, she was one hell of a treat for the eyes. Her eyes were beguiling, while her movements were teasing and seductive. When she walked, she swayed her hips in a very exaggerated fashion, causing those who saw her to follow her with their gazes. With someone like her standing on the platform, everyone's attention was drawn to the center of the room. Sorry for keeping you all waiting for so long. The next duel for today is between Benson of the Guard Forces and the famous Hunter Tram. Both of them are proud warriors of our base. Who will be the one to win? Let's watch and see. After giving a brief introduction, the seductive woman hurriedly retreated from the stage as animalistic cries began to ring out from throughout the room. Two muscular men dressed in briefs who were surrounded by a retinue of others made their way out from the crowds. Each wore ragged caped cloaks, and neither of them was carrying any weapons or defensive items. They used neither boxing gloves nor boxing helmets. After moving to stand atop the dueling ring, they simultaneously cast off their tattered capes, revealing their tough muscles and chiseled physiques. The two looked quite similar in size and shape, but one was white while the other was black. The two bowed slightly to each other, but both stared unblinkingly at the other as they entered combat stances. The dangerous auras emanating from the two of them spoke plain as to what type of people they were. Not only were they highly experienced warriors who had experienced many battles, they were also both the type of person to take the other's life if the opportunity arose. Cloudhawk watched all of this, rather dazed. Right at this moment, clang! A copper gong was suddenly struck, scaring Cloudhawk out of his wits. Right at that moment, those two muscular warriors let out bestial growls as they charged towards each other like a pair of stampeding rhinos. The black man was the first to deliver a heavy blow. Whoosh! The white man had feigned an opening to lure in that attack, only to ensure that it missed. The white man then delivered a crushing knee strike to the black man's gut, and the black man instantly hunched over, curling up like a shrimp. The white man then delivered a right elbow to the black man's back. The two consecutive strikes caused such heavy internal injuries that blood instantly came flying out from the black man's mouth. One could imagine how heavy these two blows had been. One final elbow knocked the black man to the ground. Yeah. The white man let out a furious howl as he lifted up his leg, then slammed it downwards. The black man hurriedly flipped backwards to dodge, and the tough wooden boards right in front of him were caved in by the force of that stomp. The white man didn't halt his attacks. After missing with his first stomp, he kicked straight out of the caved-in floorboards and struck the black man, knocking him into a corner of the ring with splinters all over his body. The white man pounced forwards, about to press the attack, but the fallen black man actually hooked his leg, catching the white man off guard and knocking him to the ground. The black man hurriedly flipped up and rose to his feet, then pounced towards the white man like a leopard. He grabbed the white man, then rammed him into one of the dueling ring posts like a monk beating a gong. Boom! The entire ring shook, and a large amount of blood began to pour out of the white man's head. The black man seized the opportunity to kick the white man into the ropes, causing even the tough ropes to bend backwards. Just as the white man was about to bounce off the ropes, the black man delivered another vicious kick. Bang! Blood poured out of the white man's mouth, spraying the faces of those beneath him with a bloody mist. This seemed to energize and excite the crowd, making them scream even more excitedly as frenzied roars swept through the crowd. The screams of the crowd seemed to help the dizzied white man come to his bearings. He shook his head hard, then let out a guttural, inhuman scream from his blood-flecked lips. Turning, he used the ropes to slingshot him forwards like an arrow. As the black man charged towards him with yet another kick, the white man suddenly grabbed the black man's leg with both arms and then threw him down onto the ground, then gave the leg a hard twist. Crack! The black man let out an agonized scream as his leg was broken. The white man then reached out and grabbed the black man's head, then slammed the back of his head into the ground. Once, twice, thrice, the black man's eyes rolled up as he lost consciousness, with blood pouring out of his every orifice. A tidal wave of screams swept across the room, and all of them were chanting the same thing. Kill him! Kill him! Kill him! The wave of cries seemed to serve as a catalyst, spurring the white man onto even greater savagery. His punches flew out like raindrops in a storm, striking the black man on the face non-stop as though he was giving vent to some hidden rage. It was like the black man had killed his father or something. Blood splattered everywhere, bringing an exhilarating, sickening brutality to this fight. Just a few seconds later, the black man had already been beaten into an unrecognizable pulp. The white man lifted up the half-dead black man over his head, letting out a series of growls from his blood-covered mouth. He was like a victorious lion proclaiming dominance over his domain. Tram! 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 The entire room exploded with cheers of celebration. The white man brought the black man's back down across his knee, hard. The terrifying sound of bones splintering could be heard as the black man's spine was broken. The white man then casually tossed the black man out of the dueling ring. Once again, everyone let out celebratory whoops of joy. As for those who had lost their bets on the black man, they began to let out curses. Some of them began to paw at the waitresses, dragging them off into nearby private rooms to give vent to their frustrations. That was truly an exciting battle. An alluring voice rang out as that seductive woman dressed in silk stockings once more stepped into the ring. Next, we have a very special program for you. Let's welcome our latest newbie into the arena. By now, Cloudhawk had a completely dazed look on his face. Oh, fuck, was this his job? No wonder no one wanted this job. This was suicide. Cloudhawk immediately cried out, I quit. I'm going home. Quitting. Not your call. The black bouncer by his side snickered, a detestable look on his face. Rules of the inn say that if you break your contract, you lose your hands. He pulled out a machete, then leered at Cloudhawk menacingly. Several other burly bouncers walked over as well. This time, he was in serious trouble. Cloudhawk never imagined that something like this would happen. The black man who had been fighting in the dueling ring was now lying right next to Cloudhawk. His face had been completely destroyed, with his nose broken, his teeth shattered, his jaw dislocated, and his spine severed. Even if he survived, he'd be nothing more than a useless cripple. He had been a very skilled combatant, but he had still ended up being beaten into such a state. How could a small guy like Cloudhawk possibly endure a punch from that big white man? Noob! 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 Everyone around him was shouting with increasing excitement. The black bouncer grabbed Cloudhawk, then tossed him into the dueling ring. Cloudhawk landed on the blood-soaked wooden boards with a thudding sound, then frantically clambered to his feet. The lights above him were dazzling him, and the cries of the crowd were truly thunderous. Smash him! Smash him! Smash him! Fuck, the two of us are in completely different weight classes. It was like a giant gorilla battling a skinny monkey. Was there even a point to a battle like this? Of course there was. There was entertainment in watching a fight between two equally matched opponents. There was also entertainment in watching a fight in which one opponent was overwhelming stronger than the other. Everyone wanted to hear the sound of bones crunching. They wanted to smell the blood, to bathe in it, to hear the weak newbie scream in agony. This was the point of entertainment. The woman clad in silk stockings watched as Cloudhawk was tossed into the arena, not an ounce of pity in her eyes. She was all smiles as she said, the time for our next performance has come. An even more exciting, even bloodier, an even more delightful feast for your eyes awaits you. Are you all ready? Smash him! Smash him! Smash him! The arena was surrounded with frenzied, twisted, yet faceless faces. No hint of human decency or rationality could be seen in those eyes. They were like wolves who wanted to drink blood, wanted to slaughter, wanted to give vent to their own frustrations. Several machete-wielding bouncers were standing below the ring, glowering menacingly at Cloudhawk. If Cloudhawk dared to escape from the dueling platform, the end result would be that they would hack him to death with their machetes. Shit! I was tricked again. But it was too late for any regrets. Tram glanced at the small figure disdainfully. This kid was probably an entire generation younger than him. How could he possibly be interested in a fight against someone like this? And judging from the kid's youthful features and the look of terror in his eyes, he probably had never even experienced any actual combat before. The battle had yet to begin, but the kid was already at the point of collapse. For Tram to battle someone like this was actually rather embarrassing and disgraceful. Still, the man had to eat. Tram had to kill the kid, and would do so using the most brutal, the most sickening, and the most entertaining methods that he could. This would be one of the most exciting performances the inn would hold today, and it was performances like this which the inn relied upon to draw in more customers. Tram wiped the blood from his face, but only succeeded in making himself look even more menacing. He chuckled. Hey kid. I'm gonna break your bones, one by one. Enjoy the next few seconds of life. Cloudhawk had been enduring all types of abuse during the past month. Although he felt rather scared, he felt even more rage at the unfairness of it all, and he glared right back at Tram and screamed, "Go fuck your mother!" Instantly, everyone around him exploded with cheers. Hey, the newbie seemed to have a bit of a temper. This made him a bit different from the kids who were usually sent up to be killed. Place your bets, everyone. Place your bets on how long this newbie will be able to last. 1 minute, 2 minutes, or even 3 minutes. The red-nosed proprietor beamed merrily as he kicked off the betting. Each time he held one of these spectacles, he was able to rake in large amounts of cash. The inn patrons all began to place their bets, causing the scene to grow increasingly lively. Are you all ready? The seductive woman dressed in silk stockings licked her lips in a tantalizing fashion, then announced, "Let the performance begin." Swaying her hips, she left the ring. Clang! The bronze gong was struck once more. Cloudhawk suddenly shot forwards like a leopard, landing a kick directly center on Tram's chest and sending him staggering backwards. This strike contained much more force than anyone would have imagined, and even someone as tough as Tram found it hard to bear. A collective "oh" rang out from the crowd. Tram never imagined that this would have happened. His eyes bulged out with shock as he staggered backwards, nearly falling to the ground. He hurriedly propped himself up with one hand, only to realize that a fist was right in front of his face. The kid possessed astonishing speed and strength. He looked so weak that a strong wind could blow him away. How the hell was he this strong? The most surprising thing of all was, just a few moments ago the kid had a look of utter terror on his face, almost as though he was a helpless little kitten. Now, he seemed to have transformed into a leopard. Tram was able to avoid this strike, but was only able to do so in a very awkward fashion. Upon missing with his first punch, Cloudhawk leapt upwards and used his own head to headbutt Tram on the bridge of his nose. Cloudhawk had spent every day of the past month being used as a punching bag by the mercenaries, but he had learned a few things as well. He had already learned some of the most basic fighting techniques, at least. Tram could feel his nose splintering, and tears couldn't help but begin to pour out of his eyes. Cloudhawk didn't give him any chance to recover at all. Cloudhawk lifted up his right arm, then delivered a powerful punch to Tram's lower jaw. His skinny little arm contained an unbelievable amount of force, damn near breaking Tram's jaw entirely. Book 1, Chapter 14 The Crazy Innkeeper. You are listening at novelfull.audio. One thought went through Tram's mind. Fuck. I underestimated the kid. The kid looked skinny and weak, but he was very physically strong. He was quite possibly a strength-focused metahuman. Cloudhawk had no actual combat experience. This was his first time actually dueling another person in a real fight, but he felt as though everything was flowing together perfectly. He could sense how all of his muscle groups were moving together in concert, and that he had exquisitely perfect control over them. There were certain high-accuracy movements which he never would have been able to carry out in the past, but now he was able to do so effortlessly. Incredible agility, perfect harmony, overwhelming speed and strength. Is this really my body? Cloudhawk never imagined that he had become this strong. This month had been an absolutely transformative one for him. Crack. Crack. Cloudhawk leapt into the air, using one leg to kick the man in his side while the other leg kicked him in the chest at high speed. This was a beautiful double-dot kick, and it sent Tram stumbling backwards once again. Tram felt dizzy, and blood was spurting out of his numb nose. The consecutive barrage of attacks had all but completely disoriented him for a moment. Still, that brief moment of blankness was quickly replaced by a sense of humiliation. A punk kid like this had actually beaten him this badly. Just when Cloudhawk thought that he had found his rhythm, Tram let out a grisly roar and began to windmill wildly with his fists, with one lucky punch connecting with Cloudhawk's chest. Cloudhawk felt as though he had just been hit with a sledgehammer, and he was knocked flying into the air before landing several meters away. Gra-ah! Cloudhawk rolled on the ground, clutching his chest in agony. Only now did he finally realize that the mercenaries had all been taking it easy on him during training. Otherwise, given how strong they were, how could he have possibly survived their beatings for so long? Not good. Cloudhawk didn't even have a chance to climb to his feet before a large, calloused hand suddenly latched onto his leg. He was dragged upside down into the air, swung in an arc, then sent flying straight towards one of the wooden ring posts. Thud. Cloudhawk slammed skull first into the wooden ring post. Black spots appeared before his eyes, and he nearly passed out. A large amount of blood poured out of his scalp and into his eyes, causing the entire world to turn crimson. This had been an extremely heavy blow. Cloudhawk felt as though the entire world was spinning, and for a moment he had no idea where he was. The punch he had taken to the chest had been a heavy strike as well, rendering him barely able to breathe. Several of his ribs were probably broken. Even for a recovery metahuman, such heavy wounds would be difficult to bear. Clearly, Tram himself was a strength metahuman. Although he wasn't a very high class 1, he had undergone years of training, and his abilities had many years to ripen and mature. For all these reasons, he was more than twice as strong as Cloudhawk was. Tram no longer underestimated the kid, he now viewed Cloudhawk as a serious opponent. Laughing wildly, he glared at the kid as the latter rolled around the floor in agony. What's wrong? That all you got? The spectators began to chant in unison again. Stand! 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 A few moments later, Cloudhawk finally managed to just barely struggle to his feet. He shook his head a few times, allowing his vision to clear up once more. He once more regained his focus, and he locked his gaze upon the man in front of him. Both of them had faces covered with blood, and they glowered at each other like vicious beasts that had run into each other within a narrow passageway in the wastelands. The cries of the spectators were growing louder and louder. Not only was this kid a much better fighter than they had imagined, he was much sturdier as well. After taking 2 incredibly heavy blows, he was still able to climb up to his feet. This alone was quite impressive. Even Tram was slightly startled by this. Still, the startlement didn't have any impact on his movements at all. This time, he launched the first attack and delivered a frontal punch. Cloudhawk's hands rose in a defensive position, but a strange smile flashed at the corners of Tram's lips. His attack had been a feint. Just as Cloudhawk prepared his defensive stance, Tram suddenly cancelled his punch and stepped forwards, ramming his shoulder into Cloudhawk and knocking him off balance. Tram's movements were incredibly fast. Next, he used his right arm to sweep Cloudhawk's legs. Cloudhawk had already been knocked off balance, now, he was sent flying into the air. Tram then used his left hand to grab Cloudhawk by the back, straightening him upside down and then driving him downwards towards the ground in a head-first fashion. If Cloudhawk really did smash into the ground, his spine would definitely be completely shattered. Not good. A sense of tremendous danger filled Cloudhawk's mind, and a tendril of flaming heat suddenly burst out of Cloudhawk's chest. His irises began to turn red as an enormous amount of power erupted from his body. He actually managed to break free of Tram's grip, then used his elbow to deliver a vicious blow to Tram's face, forcing Tram to jerk backwards and making it impossible for Tram to immediately act against him. Cloudhawk seized this moment to do a somersault in midair, using both legs to kick off Tram's chest. Tram fell to the ground, but not before he was able to send Cloudhawk flying as well. The two ended up being knocked to the ground at the same time by each other. However, Cloudhawk clearly suffered a heavier fall, all of his bones felt as though they were dislocated, and he very nearly fainted from the pain. The inn was a cacophony of noise. This was simply a dazzling display for them. They were all able to see what a close call that had been. If the little devil had been just a half-second too slow, he probably would have died. By now, everyone could tell that although the kid wasn't very experienced, he had superb combat awareness and was able to respond in an almost instinctive manner. Tram's face was beginning to puff up like a balloon. Thankfully for him, he was an extremely healthy and strong man, a few small injuries like this wouldn't have much of an impact on him. As for Cloudhawk, his decent constitution and tough physique meant that he hadn't been irrecoverably injured either. The two rose to their feet at the same time, then charged towards each other once again. Bam! Cloudhawk landed a kick on Tram. Crack! Tram landed a punch on Cloudhawk. The two were of completely different sizes, but both their faces were covered in blood as they furiously battled against each other. Cloudhawk was a bit lacking in technique and experience, and so just a few blows later his right arm was trapped once more. Tram gave his right arm a hard tug, and with a crunching sound, Cloudhawk's right arm was dislocated. This time, the pain Cloudhawk felt was truly, heart-piercingly agonizing. The sensation was so intense, Cloudhawk was instantly covered in cold sweat, and yet, instead of sapping him of his will and resolve, it actually stimulated the innate stubbornness inside of him. Ignoring the danger of his right arm being permanently maimed, he delivered a truly vicious knee strike to Tram's groin. This time, his strike was right on the money, and Tram let out a miserable howl that was utterly inhuman. Cloudhawk seized this opportunity to rake two of his fingers over Tram's eyes. Yet again, this strike caught Tram off guard and he was unable to defend against it. Cloudhawk then gave him one more kick, sending him stumbling backwards towards the edges of the dueling ring. Tram was temporarily blinded, unable to open his eyes. All he could do was to windmill his arms about blindly, hoping to be able to buy himself some extra time. Who would have thought that Cloudhawk would scamper forwards and trip his legs? Tram lost his balance and fell backwards, and his tough body ended up falling outside of the dueling ring. The inn was completely silent for a few seconds, and then the cheers of the spectator burst forth once more. Noob! 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 This hadn't exactly been exhilarating, as they had been hoping to see blood and brains flying everywhere. That hadn't happened. And yet, this had truly been an unexpected surprise and pleasure. The half-grown kid, the one they had thought would be killed, had ended up winning. Although luck had played a part in it, all the slightly more experienced spectators could tell that this kid wasn't an ordinary one. Cloudhawk panted raggedly. He never thought that he would actually be able to beat that dangerous fellow. His face was as swollen as a pig's face, but it was covered with a look of gratification and joy. He had no idea that he had become this powerful. Bruised, battered, and swollen-faced, Cloudhawk walked towards the red-nosed man. "Where's my meat? Meat?" The red-nosed innkeeper no longer had that friendly, amiable look on his face. His voice was now both shrill and cutting. "You wrecked my performance, and you want to ask for payment. Just fuck off. I earned it." Cloudhawk could feel a ball of fire blazing in his chest. This was no longer a matter of meat, he felt completely insulted, and a desire for blood was filling his thoughts. "How dare you refuse? A stupid, arrogant kid like you wants to threaten and berate me." Rednose was enraged. "Waste the fucker." The black bouncer immediately lifted up his machete and hacked downwards towards Cloudhawk. In this day and age, trust and honor were jokes. However, Cloudhawk never would have imagined that this man would have reached such a level of depravity. The man had first lied to him to try and get him killed in a duel. Now, not only was he reneging on the payment he owed Cloudhawk, he was trying to kill him. The black bouncer's strike was fast and furious. Cloudhawk did his best to avoid it, but the blade still scraped past his back and left a huge, gaping wound there. Fiery pain filled every inch of his body, and blood spurted out of the wound and matted his clothes. "Who the fuck do you think you are?" The red-nosed innkeeper's gaze was filled with malice. "A punk-ass kid like you wants to try and take something away from me. You'll be missing your two hands when you leave." The spectators in the inn began to whoop with excitement, as though a new, unexpected performance had just started. "Great idea. Chop his hands off. Waste him." The black bouncer strode forwards, machete in hand. Everyone called out excitedly as they began to circle around the two of them. Seeing the situation, Cloudhawk had only a single thought in his mind: flee. Fuck the rat jerky. Cloudhawk's entire body was slippery with blood. He turned, pushed aside a burly man, then made a beeline towards the exit. However, right at this moment, one of the other patrons stuck out a leg and intentionally tripped him. Thud. Cloudhawk instantly lost his balance and smashed into a wooden table, breaking it into tiny pieces. As he fell, he tore the wound on his back even wider. The agonizing pain was about to cause him to pass out. "Ahaha! Waste him! Waste him!" The entire inn was filled with those mocking, malicious calls. The spectators only cared about further fanning the flames, and not a single person stepped forward to intervene or have the matter be brought to an end. Their faces were all distorted with savagery. This was a savage era, and the hearts of men were even more savage. The black bouncer lifted his machete up high, then chopped downwards once more. Cloudhawk's injuries were so heavy that he couldn't even rise to his feet. He never would have imagined that he would die in a place like this, and die in such a pathetic fashion. But just as he was about to close his eyes and wait for death. Clang! A metallic clanging sound rang out with explosive power. It was another blade that clashed against the former, causing sparks to fly everywhere. The bloody scene which everyone had been eagerly anticipating failed to materialize. A snow-white machete suddenly appeared out of nowhere, stopping the black bouncer's machete in its tracks. What completely flabbergasted everyone was that this machete had easily and single-handed stopped the heavy, two-handed hacking blow from the black bouncer. The machete which saved Cloudhawk's life was roughly 2 feet long and shaped like a dog's leg. It had a straight back but a curved blade, and was heavy at the back but narrow at the front. It gleamed with a cold, almost snowy light, and Cloudhawk recognized it. Wasn't this Mad Dog's machete? The black bouncer's hand had turned numb, and a large notch had appeared on the edge of his blade. Before the bouncer even had a chance to assess the situation, his opponent struck out with his other hand and sent a dazzling streak of cold light flashing downwards. The black bouncer felt his arms suddenly become lighter as his hand suddenly fell to the ground, still clutching that machete. "Aw!" The bouncer clutched his severed arm, screaming miserably as blood continued to spurt out of it non-stop, almost like a faucet that had been permanently turned on. Mad Dog lifted his leg up, then delivered a kick. The bouncer's chest was completely caved in as all of his ribs shattered apart. He flew backwards into the cabinets behind him as though he had been shot out of a cannon, causing all types of wine bottles to fall down to the ground and making the inn reek even more heavily of alcohol. This had all happened in just the blink of an eye. Everyone was dazed for a few seconds, and then they began to scream with even more excitement. Mad Dog! What the hell? Rednose revealed a look of rage and terror. He obviously recognized the hideous black man standing in front of him. I done nothing to you. Why are you going crazy on me? Heh. Heh heh. Heh heh heh. The scar on Mad Dog's hideously ugly face was twisting and contorting like a centipede as he grinned, and his voice was both deep and hoarse. Bulleen, a member of the Tartarus mercenaries. Are you that fucking tired of livin'? Tartarus. An ugly look appeared on Rednose's face. Are you talking about the kid? Shit, I didn't know he belonged to you guys. This is all over 5 strings of rat jerky, right? Take it. I'll give it to em, alright. Too late. The machete flashed once again. This time, it landed on the bodyguard in front of the innkeeper, and it cut straight through the man's shoulder and all the way down to his waist, tearing through flesh and bone alike. It was a terrifyingly wet sound, and the man was virtually split in half by this blow. Mad Dog's strength was utterly terrifying. It didn't even look like he was hacking a man in half, it was as though he was just cutting through a piece of melted butter. Blood sprayed everywhere as the man's organs burst out, drenching Mad Dog in blood. The thick, nauseating scent of blood seemed to intoxicate him, causing his face to become increasingly savage and terrifying. In fact, he looked almost maddened and intoxicated. Move, move. All of you, gee. Rednose didn't manage to finish the final word, because an unbelievably fast streak of cold light swept right through his neck, cutting open his skin, chopping through his flesh, slicing open his veins, and splitting apart his bones with a ripping sound. There was nothing and no one who was able to stop this from happening. The cold machete cut through him as easily as tofu. The entire world seemed to spin before Rednose's bulging eyes. There was a look of surprise in those eyes, as though he didn't understand why his field of vision had just completely changed. Only when his gaze fell upon his own headless corpse did a look of endless horror and amazement appear in his eyes. The disco lights in the inn continued to spin about, and the hard rock music continued to blare. As for the blood spurting out of that headless corpse, it was like a newly popped bottle of champagne that helped everyone present celebrate this special event. Mad Dog's gone mad. Kill him. The bouncers in the inn all knew Mad Dog's reputation. Once the man went mad, the only way to stop him was to kill him. Otherwise, he wouldn't stop until he wiped everyone out. These bouncers were, by nature, exceedingly vile men. This was true for almost everyone capable of rising to positions of importance in Black Flag Outpost. None of them were fools. Machetes, staves, daggers, all sorts of weapons were drawn out as everyone charged straight towards Mad Dog. The disco balls spun even faster, and the heavy rock music seemed to pound even louder. This party was about to go completely out of control. Be Novcom. Book 1, Chapter 15, A Bloody Party. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Pandemonium. Utter pandemonium. The disco ball continued to whirl merrily as Mad Dog moved through the inn like a crazed dancer, his every motion filled with speed, agility, and madness. Clang. His machete chopped straight through an iron rod, then cleaved off the head that was directly behind it as easily as chopping apart a watermelon. Even as a warrior inside the inn lifted up his weapon to strike at Mad Dog used his twin machetes to deliver 7 or 8 hacking blows against his body. He was like a whirling dervish, his twin machetes dancing like butcher blades that were carving off chunks of meat for a customer. In the twinkling of an eye, that man was chopped into unrecognizable shapes. His blood spurted everywhere, bathing everyone around him in that sticky stench. The heavy rock music seemed to blare louder and louder, urging Mad Dog on. Wreck everything. Break everything. Smash everything. Kill everyone. Mad Dog was like an insane artist, and his every motion, his every chop, and his every kill was like a beautiful crescendo of violence in all of its terrible beauty. Every single person brought down by his chops lost at least one limb. However, no matter how strong Mad Dog was, he was still just one person, whereas the inn had over 10 bouncers. Even some of the guests ended up getting drawn into this ridiculous, meaningless fight. A slender, agile form that was shaped rather like a hyena pounced towards Mad Dog from behind, delivering a dagger strike to the back of Mad Dog's neck. Mad Dog had already entered his berserk state, where he only attacked and never defended at all. As a result, he was instantly thrust into a perilous situation. Ah! Cloudhawk managed to squeeze out a bit more strength out of his body, surprising even himself. He lifted a bar stool up, then roared angrily as he charged forwards to smash it against the ambusher's head. Crack! Splinters flew everywhere. As for Cloudhawk, he barreled into the man and knocked him down the ground, and the two rolled over a few times in on the blood-matted floor. The dagger-wielding man was also a savage fellow. Blood was pouring out of his dazed head, but he still had the presence of mind to deliver a back-handed stab with his dagger. Cloudhawk wasn't able to dodge, but he was able to twist his body slightly, ensuring that the dagger didn't strike any of his vital organs. At this moment, he realized that all that time he had spent dissecting corpses alongside Mantis hadn't been a waste after all. At a time like this, it was helping him stay alive. A stabbing pain followed as the dagger pierced into his body, but Cloudhawk ignored it as he picked a long wooden spike from the ground, then almost instantly shoved it deep into his opponent's eye socket. The man almost instantly stopped moving without even letting out a scream. A savage, bestial expression was on Cloudhawk's face. No one else dared to even draw near him. As for Mad Dog, by now he had hacked over 10 people to death in succession, bathing the entire inn in blood. All of the tables had been destroyed, reducing the insides of the inn into rubble. Only now did the spectators begin to feel fear, and they all began to flee en masse. After having luxuriated in slaughter, Mad Dog had worked the insanity and the bloodlust out of his system. He seemed back to his normal self, and he glanced sideways at the blood-covered Cloudhawk. Ha! Not dead yet. Cloudhawk had a dislocated elbow, several broken ribs, a long machete wound across his back, and a dagger in his chest. Even for a recovery metahuman, wounds like this were incredibly dangerous. Cloudhawk didn't respond, he just wrenched the dagger out of his chest. Ahaha! Not bad, kid. Pretty tough. Mad Dog inserted his 2 machetes back into their sheaths. No time to waste. Hurry up and grab what you want. We need to leave this place immediately. Almost everyone in the inn had been killed, with the few survivors having fled long ago. Mad Dog wasn't sure how heavy the consequences would be for this, but since he already killed so many he figured he might as well grab their things. Besides, things probably wouldn't get too out of hand. Mad Dog swept the entire inn clean of everything of value, while Cloudhawk scoured it for food. When he pulled open a drawer, he discovered a glittering silver object. It looked like a fairly exquisite silver revolver. This innkeeper actually had a revolver. What a dangerous fellow he was. If Rednose had pulled out the gun and used it, the results of the wild melee would have been completely different. More importantly, this thing had to be worth at least 20 or 30 strips of rat jerky, right? Cloudhawk wasn't able to find any bullets. Who knew where Rednose had hidden them? Still, it didn't matter. He tucked the gun into his clothes and continued to scour the place for other valuables. When the 2 blood-splattered mercenaries left the inn, the people outside instantly flooded inside to grab whatever was remaining. The devastated inn was once more thrust into pandemonium, with new fights breaking out as some of the looters began to fight each other. As a result, a number of new corpses were created as well. In the end, someone set the inn alight. The flames reached towards the skies, flickering brightly in signifying an end to this performance. By the time Cloudhawk reached the mercenary base, he had lost so much blood that he was in a rather dazed state. Mad Dog dragged him over to Mantis' workshop, tossed him onto a table, then paid him no further attention. Mantis frowned slightly when he saw Cloudhawk's wounds. He quickly reset the dislocated bones, then poured some medicinal fluids from a glass bottle that held certain mutated plants within them. He first smeared the fluids over the various wounds, then cut apart Cloudhawk's clothes, picked up a sewing needle, and began to stitch the wounds together in a very practiced manner. These wounds were very serious. Any ordinary person would have died, no questions asked. Even recovery metahumans would be in danger, especially if the wounds became infected. Fortunately, Cloudhawk was in luck. Mantis was one of the top physicians within Black Flag Outpost, and the medicinal fluids he had extracted from the mutated plants were used to help fight back against any possible infections. As for whether Cloudhawk would survive or not, that was up to his own fortitude. The others were gathered at the training grounds of the mercenary base. When Sly Fox understood what had happened, he was so furious he was about to explode. Black Flag Outpost is no longer the same place it was a year ago. Why the fuck did you have to cause such a huge shitstorm? Did you even think about the amount of trouble we are gonna be in? Mad Dog's body was still caked in blood and gore, but he had a disdainful look on his face. He replied in an uncaring voice, "How big a shitstorm can it be? I just killed a few assholes, that's all." Right at this moment, Mantis walked over towards them as well. Mad Dog asked casually, "Hey, the kid dead yet?" "I hope he does." Sly Fox didn't even wait for Mantis to respond before saying angrily, "I told the kid not to run around. Now he's done gone and kicked over the hornet's nest. He really is a natural-born troublemaker." Right at this moment, the domineering sound of a revving motorcycle could be heard directly outside their gates. "Here already. That was fast." Sly Fox gestured with his hands and all of the mercenaries picked up their weapons. Moments later, the gates were forcibly kicked open from the outside, and a gigantic figure rushed in alongside 10+ soldiers. If you didn't already know what the concept of badass was, you would as soon as you saw this guy, no dictionary needed. He was 2 meters tall, incredibly muscular, and dressed in a tattered tank top that put his chiseled, rock hard muscles on full display. His tousled golden hair and beard covered his world-weary features, making him look like a proud lion who was facing a great storm with no fear. He stood there in front of the mercenaries, his 2 hands pressed behind his back. His waist was ramrod stiff, and his back was as straight as a spear. This was a simple military posture, but it commanded an aura of absolute dominance. This giant of a man was every bit as impressive as the captains of the Tartarus mercenaries, and the 10+ figures behind him were all highly trained soldiers. Most likely, they were just as tough and skilled as the mercenaries themselves. They were amongst the most elite soldiers of Black Flag Outpost. Sly Fox forced a smile onto his pudgy face. "Grizzly, long time no see. Man, you are looking more and more badass every time I see you. What brings you over to my neck of the woods? Don't try that shit on me." The muscular man nicknamed Grizzly let out a cold snort. His voice echoed like thunder as he said in a very solemn manner, "You know why I'm here. Hurry up and hand him over." Relax buddy. We just killed a few people, right? The Tartarus Company has contributed quite a bit to the outpost over the past few years. No point in getting into a war over a small problem like this, right? Sly Fox beamed merrily as he walked over. "I promise it won't happen again, alright? Next time." Grizzly's hard face only sank even more. If word of this spreads to her ears and pisses her off, do you think there will be a next time? A nervous look flashed past Slyfox's face. That's why I wanted to ask you to help me out here. You're in charge of the entire outpost security. Come on, the two of us have fought together and bled together. If you can't even help a brother out at a time like this, well, let's just say that I really would have misjudged you. This is the last time. I swear, this is the last fucking time. Grizzly's face was dark with rage. Fine, I'll let Mad Dog off, but you need to hand over the kid that caused all this shit. I'll take his head back and be able to say that I've handled this matter. See, you sayin' shit like that just pisses me off. Mad Dog was rather irritated now. That fucker Rednose was bullying our people. I just so happened to see it myself when I was drinking in his inn. The kid might be a bit pissy sometimes, but he's not the type of guy to cause trouble for no reason. Grizzly said flatly, I don't care. Someone has to answer for this disaster. Slyfox was rather unhappy as well. You're making things tough for me, you know. Grizzly glared back at him. You do understand that if I wasn't trying to give the Tartarus Company some face, I wouldn't even be standing here chatting with you about this, right? The outpost has its own rules. Someone has to die for what happened today, and that's that. No trace of amusement could be seen in Slyfox's eyes. His right hand seemed to, unconsciously, drift down to one of the pistols on his waist, and his voice actually took on a rare timbre of power and authority. If you're thinking that you can take mine away from me, go ahead, give it a try. Grizzly's face turned as hard as steel, and popping sounds could be heard coming from his 10 fingers. As for the soldiers around him, they all tightened their grips around their weapons. Come on. Let's do it. Mad Dog actually drew the machetes from his waist, both his weapons and his body still covered in blood and gore. First person to back down is a pussy. The mercenaries all gathered together as well. As for Mantis, he stood there without moving, but a hint of cold light was flashing between his fingers. The situation was incredibly tense, and both sides were at the verge of drawing weapons against each other. Grizzly knew that there was no way he could deal with all 3 Tartarus captains by himself, nor could a single squad of elite outpost soldiers deal with the entire Tartarus mercenary company. However, if the Tartarus company truly did choose to go to war against one of the elite outpost squads, it would never again be able to shelter here within the outpost. Grizzly's voice became even deeper. Do you really have to protect that rookie? He might be a useless rookie, but he's a Tartarus rookie. Nobody, and I mean nobody, has the right to touch a member of Tartarus. Slyfox's hands remained pressed against his pistols. Given his speed and control, he would be able to almost instantly draw and fire his guns, taking down at least 3 or 4 of the opponents in an instant. He had a relaxed look on his face, seeming to be not the slightest bit worried about the consequences. Slyfox knew exactly what type of a person Grizzly was, which was why he felt certain that the man probably wouldn't attack. Better not regret it later. Grizzly turned. Withdraw. The warriors of the elite squad all sheathed their weapons, then immediately departed from the Tartarus headquarters. A short while later, the sputtering sound of the motorcycle could once more be heard before it disappeared off into the distance. Mad Dog spat towards the location where Grizzly had been standing. Fucking poser. He's nothing more than a dog on that bitch's leash. Dickless dickwad. You know, pissing off Grizzly for the sake of that rookie is the dumbest motherfucking decision I've made in my entire life. Slyfox really was starting to regret it now. Man, what the hell is going on today? How could all of this shit have gone down? Mad Dog's expression suddenly turned somber for once. I suspect that the newbie is actually a multi-meta. Slyfox's face tightened slightly upon hearing this. Seriously. The vast majority of metahumans only had a single type of metapower. If they wanted access to other metapowers, they'd generally have to inject themselves with certain genomic treatments. However, those genomic treatments were incredibly rare, and the success rate was usually quite low. Still, a tiny number of people were born with multiple types of metapowers. They didn't need to inject themselves with any gene therapies, all they had to do was to unleash their latent potential and they would be able to develop in multiple areas. Although these multi-metas were incredibly rare, they did exist. The third captain, Mantis, was himself a multi-class metahuman. Aside from enhanced healing abilities, the kid seems to have some sort of agility metapower as well. Mad Dog briefly narrated what he had seen earlier. Given the speed and reaction times which Cloud Hawk had displayed in battle, it seemed likely that he had activated some sort of agility metapower. That means he's not completely useless. We can spend a bit of actual effort on training the kid. Dual-class metahumans were quite rare as well. Sly Fox rubbed his jaw, mumbling to himself. For the first time, he felt that perhaps pissing Grizzly off wasn't a completely meaningless decision. Actually, Mad Dog's judgment had been off. Cloud Hawk hadn't just improved in agility and healing speed, he was definitely a strength metahuman as well. The only thing he was lacking was training and exercise, and the fact that he had been starving for most of his life hadn't helped. This was why Mad Dog hadn't noticed his surprising strength. Book 1, Chapter 16 Legacy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Cloud Hawk lay there in Mantis' workshop, completely wrapped up in bandages. Mad Dog, Sly Fox, and the other mercenaries were watching to one side as Mantis did his job, and Sly Fox was already beginning to frown. "What's the situation?" Mantis replied, "He lost too much blood. He needs a blood transfusion." The ruins didn't have access to blood transfusion technology, but Mantis was the most talented physician in both the Tartarus Company as well as the entire Black Flag outpost. He not only had the ability to test blood phenotypes, he had even developed his own blood transfusion apparatus. Despite that, given the sanitary conditions in Black Flag outpost, actually using that equipment posed an enormous risk to everyone involved. Sly Fox didn't give a damn. "Then what are you waiting for? Hurry up and give him the blood he needs. I don't care what you have to do, you need to save his life and bring him back to us. If he dies, that'll mean I pissed off Grizzly for absolutely nothing. That would be an abso-fucking-lutely stupid travesty." Mad Dog just said, "It's just blood, right? Use mine, you can use mine as well. Shit, I got plenty of blood. Take as much as you need. No way we can let the kid die like this. Yeah, life would be much more boring without him." More than 10 of the mercenaries spoke up to offer their blood. Cloud Hawk had only joined the Tartarus Company recently, but during this past month his tenacious personality and his hard-working habits had caused everyone to take a liking to him. He was a bit weak, but they had already acknowledged him as a member of the group. If Cloud Hawk was still awake, he would probably be so shocked that he wouldn't be able to shut his mouth. Normally, the mercenaries treated him like absolute dirt, and yet, today they were all fighting for the chance to help save him by offering their own blood. As for Mantis, his features remained as blank and emotionless as ever. Without saying a single word, he ran a few blood phenotype tests, then selected the mercenaries who fit his criteria. He withdrew some blood from every single one of them, then used it to fill his blood transfusion bag and began to transfer it into Cloudhawk's body. In the end, their greatest fears were realized. Although Cloudhawk's condition was temporarily stabilized after the infusion of blood, it once again worsened at around midnight. His entire body was beet red, and his skin was so hot it was as though he was being burnt by coals. His mind was a blur, and he repeatedly slurred random words. There was nothing Mantis could do. The medical conditions and equipment were simply too poor. Whenever an injured party suffered a severe infection like this, he would have a less than 10% chance of surviving. Things were in the hands of the gods, now. All they could do was hope that the kid's destiny was not to die here. Cloudhawk found himself in a foggy, hazy state. He felt incredibly hot, so hot that he could barely breathe. It was as though he was sleeping inside a giant burning cauldron. When Cloudhawk tried to trace the heat to its source, he ended up discovering that it was all coming from that stone which was hanging around his neck. The stone seemed to have been linked up with his body in a strange manner, connecting with his bones and his flesh to become a part of him. It was unleashing some sort of strange energy that was capable of impacting Cloudhawk's entire body. In his dazed state, Cloudhawk was actually able to make out the voice of the stone more clearly than ever before. It sounded like the furious waves of the ocean, like the sky, like the earth, like something hidden within the depths of the sea, like the lightless dark of the night, like a behemoth so vast that it could silently swallow 100 enormous whales without causing any stir. This was a sea. A sea of willpower, a sea of mental strength, a sea of energy. Was he able to better commune with the stone when he was in his current, trance-like state? Not only could Cloudhawk sense the ebbs and flows of that sea of mental energy inside the stone, he could even hear a hoarse voice whispering to him from a hidden location at the very bottom of the sea. Truth springs forth from the mind. Your thoughts shall determine all, and what you shall imagine is what you shall see. Although the voice was soft, it was filled with an astonishing presence and was as stately as the voice of a king. Awaken, heir to my legacy. Cloudhawk felt as though someone had just poured a bucket of ice water over his face. He suddenly woke up from his stupor, only to realize that he hadn't actually returned to the real world. He was located within a very strange region, with his 2 feet standing on a pitch-black sea that was as smooth and clear as a mirror. This wasn't the real world. This was a dream. World created by that will within the stone. Who is talking? Cloudhawk frantically scanned his surroundings. He knew that this was a dream, but he found himself unable to escape it. He had never experienced something as strange as this before, and it was completely outside the bounds of what he could understand. The endless black mist in front of him began to condense together and form into a tall, savage-looking figure. The figure didn't seem to be human, but Cloudhawk wasn't able to see what it looked like. He could only see a pair of red, ape-like eyes glowing within that dark silhouette, as well as a jewel that was glowing in front of the figure's chest. Was that jewel the one Cloudhawk had found the other day? Was it originally an adornment upon that suit of unique, peculiar armor? As for the mysterious fellow standing before Cloudhawk, he had to be the jewel's previous master. He must have been able to store his will and his mind into the jewel through some unknown method, and the reason why Cloudhawk had nearly gone mad with berserk rage was due to this man's influence. As for the strange dream Cloudhawk had fallen into after suffering such heavy injuries, they were also caused by this man. Cloudhawk stared at the man through the blurry mist that separated the two of them. Who exactly are you? A majestic yet hoarse voice once more rang out from that black silhouette. A failure who has been forgotten. Who I am no longer matters. What matters is for you to know who you are. Who I am. I'm me. Cloudhawk was rather confused now. What was this guy talking about? He shouted out rather nervously, "Fuck, man, what's going on here? Why are you in my dreams? No need to be afraid. I won't harm you. In fact, I died long ago. What remains is nothing more than a part of my will which I left inside this stone. Only when certain criteria are fulfilled and when a person with certain potential emerges shall this stone be activated. For now, you can neither see nor sense my entire will, just a fragment which I set up long ago." The speaker was saying such confused, baffling things that Cloudhawk understood none of it at all. "It has been many years. I have stubbornly remained here, all for the sake of awaiting your arrival. Ever since you picked up that jewel, you have assumed a destiny that you cannot shake off." The black silhouette looked at Cloudhawk, then said slowly, "The world has been bewildered by lies and deceptions. Since the cycle has begun anew, I hope that you shall continue the path which I started but was unable to finish. Bring an end to all these things." Cloudhawk really had no idea what the man was talking about, but he felt an inexplicable sense of irritation and rejection towards it. "What sort of gibberish are you babbling about? I don't understand a word that you are saying. Let me out. Don't be impatient, young man. I don't have much time left. A hint of aged sorrow appeared within the black silhouette's voice. I can sense what you are thinking. Do you wish to leave the wastelands? Cloudhawk suddenly trembled. Can you help me? I can't help you leave, not directly, but I can give you what you need more than anything else right now. What? The black silhouette said slowly, I can give to you what little power I have left. Cloudhawk instantly felt excited. Power. Wasn't this exactly what he needed more than anything else right now? He was still far, far too weak, which was why everyone continued to bully him. If he was as strong as Sly Fox or Mad Dog, he would be able to do whatever he wanted in Black Flag Outpost. This mysterious figure had to be at least as powerful as Mad Dog, right? The black sea beneath his feet suddenly began to stir, and Cloudhawk had the feeling that he was about to be dragged within the waves. A large amount of an ice-cold substance flowed into his body, causing him to feel a sensation of agonizing pain. Unfortunately, at present you are still far too weak. I can only bestow a part of my psionic energy unto you for now. The black silhouette's voice began to fade in and out as it grew more and more indistinct. Please keep the stone safe. It is the key to both space and time, and is the most important talisman of my race. Cloudhawk was like a drowning man at sea. The sense of breathlessness and pressure was absolutely stifling, and he could neither open his mouth nor cry out for rescue. That icy feeling filled every inch of his body, pouring in from every single direction and into every single pore. Cloudhawk frantically tried to reach out and grab something, but was unable to find anything to grip. His consciousness instantly began to fade once again. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt a hand reach down and grab him, bringing him up from the surface of the water. Ah! Cloudhawk let out a scream as he woke up. It was noon. Cloudhawk's entire body was covered with bandages that had strange medicinal smells to them, and every single wound on his body had been neatly stitched shut. Fiery pain radiated through his entire body, as though his skin had been torn open and he had been placed atop a cooking rack. The various strange medicinal pastes that had been smeared across his body made his wounds burn, almost as though they contained salt or spices within them. Cloudhawk's right elbow was hanging in front of his chest. Right now, he was so weak that he felt as though he had just been chased by a wild beast for 10 kilometers non-stop. However, for some reason his mind was incredibly clear and alert, and the surrounding world itself seemed to be more in focus than it had been in the past. He could even hear the mercenaries outside laughing and chatting with each other. This had to be the mercenary base. Cloudhawk thought back to what had just happened, especially the conversation he had with that strange man in his dreams. Was it nothing more than an odd nightmare? Cloudhawk shook his head. Ignoring the pain, he got off the bed, walked towards the door, then pushed it open with his one good arm. The 20 mercenaries that were just about to start eating all came to a sudden halt, their gazes focusing upon Cloudhawk. For a moment, things were completely silent. Cloudhawk couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Were these guys planning on picking a fight with him for having caused them trouble? But in the next instant, everyone exploded with roars of laughter and cheers. Ha! Woke up, kiddo. You really do heal pretty damn fast. Man, you got the shit beat out of you, didn't you? How could you let a dumb fuck like Rednose kick you around like that? You really are good for nothing, you know. Usually, the mercenaries loved to mock Cloudhawk and laugh at him. However, after his sudden display of power in the inn and his near brush with death, they started to have more positive feelings about this kid that they once loved to hate. Whap! A fat, meaty hand clapped Cloudhawk on his shoulders. Cloudhawk leapt up like a startled hare, nearly screaming from the pain. You did that on purpose, you motherfucker. The clap had landed directly on one of his stitched-up wounds. Sly Fox completely ignored the glowering, twisted look on Cloudhawk's face as he delivered yet another heavy clap with his meaty hand. You've certainly been making a name for yourself, Yasanevich. Not only did you go out and cause trouble, you got the shit beat out of you. You've dishonored the entire damn Tartarus company, you know. That hurts. Cold sweat appeared on Cloudhawk's forehead. He really wanted to plant a punch right into that fat face, but he also knew that was something best reserved for his dreams. It won't happen next time, all right. Next time. Kill them all, next time. Learn to wipe your own ass and solve your own problems. Got it. After Sly Fox finished lecturing him, he tossed a metal plate onto the table in front of them with a clattering sound. In the future, you'll eat with us, train with us, and go out on missions with us. The plate held a chunk of blackened mutabeast jerky, and a few pieces of something that looked like potatoes but which had been all but burnt to a crisp. Sly Fox gave the awestruck Cloudhawk a hard glare. What, food's not to your liking, dot. N. Not at all. Cloudhawk sat down without even thinking, then began to chew at the food. Although he had no idea what type of mutabeast this meat came from, it tasted far better than any type of meat he had ever eaten before. Before this, he had only been given 2 pieces of bread each day. Now, he was able to enjoy wine and meat alongside the other mercenaries, and would enjoy 3 set meals each day. It was like a poor beggar suddenly coming into an enormous inheritance. This blissful sense of manna falling from the heavens instantly filled Cloudhawk with content and joy. Cloudhawk never would have imagined that rather than castigate him for having caused troubles in the inn, the other mercenaries would actually view them as having formally joined their ranks. His long month of humiliation and labor, had he finally overcome it all. Book 1, Chapter 17 Beast Wave. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A few days later, Cloudhawk was able to get his stitches removed. In another 4 or 5 days, he would probably be completely recovered. These days spent convalescing were some of the most comfortable days in his life. Not only did Cloudhawk not need to serve as a human punching bag, he was allowed to lay back and relax each day while enjoying 3 meals of meat. In just a few short days, he had grown considerably more muscular. It was getting to the point where Cloudhawk was actually hoping that his wounds would heal a bit more slowly. After waking up from his heavy injuries, he improved quite a bit in every single area. The thing was, Cloudhawk didn't feel as though he had improved dramatically in any particular area. Perhaps that dream really was nothing more than a dream. Cloudhawk didn't really pay it too much heed, and he cast that memory to the back of his mind. By the 5th day, Cloudhawk was more or less recovered. Mantis immediately called Cloudhawk over and ordered Cloudhawk to assist him. The tables in Mantis' workshop were filled with preservative jars that were marked with all kinds of script, as well as many test tubes that were filled with all sorts of strange liquid experiments. The workshop had all sorts of crude, ungainly tools within it as well, but by now Cloudhawk was used to all of them. Cloudhawk dragged a freshly arrived corpse over and placed it on the dissection table. This was the corpse of a young woman who had probably died recently. Judging from her emaciated frame, she had most likely died of starvation. Similar corpses could be seen everywhere. Mantis, what are you going to analyze today? Cloudhawk picked up his pincers and his scalpel, preparing to go to work. Heart. Lungs. Liver. Something else. Although he hadn't completely healed, he had recovered enough to do some work. Mantis withdrew his blood. Covered hands from the chest of a dissected corpse. If Cloudhawk was a new arrival, he probably wouldn't be used to this sight, but over the course of the past month he himself had carried out multiple such dissections, and so he didn't feel as though anything was off. The Tartarus mercenary company had 3 captains, and Mantis was the most inscrutable of the 3. He seemed extremely cultured and knowledgeable, and was able to extract strange liquids from random mutated plants which he would mix together into restorative poultices and healing solutions. The reason why Cloudhawk had been able to recover from his injuries so quickly was completely thanks to Mantis, and so Cloudhawk admired the man very much. Cloudhawk had never seen Mantis in combat before. However, Mantis' skills as a physician alone ensured that he would never go hungry in this era. Hang it up high. Cloudhawk was slightly startled upon hearing Mantis' instructions. Was the strange fellow planning some sort of odd experiment yet again? Still, Cloudhawk didn't waste time asking questions. He immediately tied a rope around the corpse's waist, then lifted it into the air. Mantis calmly pulled out a silver revolver, then tossed it onto the table. Cloudhawk couldn't help but gawk at that revolver. Cloudhawk had taken it from Rednose's inn, but later on Cloudhawk had passed out from blood loss. By the time he had woken up, the revolver had disappeared. He had felt certain that Mad Dog had confiscated it, as guns were quite valuable. For a rookie like Cloudhawk to possess one really was a waste. Shit, isn't that my gun? So you were the one who took it. Cloudhawk had been given all sorts of grunt work in the mercenary base, and part of his job had been to help maintain their firearms. As a result, he was quite familiar with how firearms worked. Mantis then fished out an orange dot-colored bullet and placed it on the table. The hell? Cloudhawk was starting to feel rather stunned. Mantis adjusted his glasses, which flashed with a cold light as he did so, making it impossible for Cloudhawk to see the look in Mantis' eyes. Mantis reached out and pointed one finger at the hanging corpse, then said in his customarily cold voice, "Shoot it as fast as you can." Is that really a good idea? Cloudhawk naturally wasn't worried about being disrespectful to the dead, that would be just laughable. His concern was that shooting a corpse was a waste of bullets. Just do it. Cloudhawk had no idea as to what Mantis was scheming, but there was nothing he could do. The stone-faced man never changed his mind and did what he said. Plus, Cloudhawk had wanted to experience firing a gun for quite some time now. Cloudhawk picked up the gun, unlatched the cylinder, loaded the bullet, then spun the cylinder back into its proper locked position. Cloudhawk had no experience in gunnery, but for some reason it all felt very natural to him. Just as he was about to raise the gun and then pull the trigger. Snick! A streak of cold light suddenly flashed through the air and sliced past his face. Clink! It was a slender, icy-cold surgical scalpel. The scalpel plunged into the corpse's forehead with perfect precision. Even if you used the most accurate of rulers to measure it, you would find that the scalpel was exactly dead center in the corpse's forehead, without being even slightly to the left or to the right. In addition, the scalpel blade had sunk completely into the forehead. Cloudhawk felt as though he had lost control over his jaw muscles as his mouth swung open. He stared, wide-eyed, at the incomprehensible sight in front of him. You spent a total of 4 seconds in drawing the gun, loading the bullet, and then firing. I would have been able to cut your throat in a third of a second. This was the first time Cloudhawk had seen Mantis launching an attack. He never would have imagined that Mantis was as incredible as this. Remember, the more complicated, high-tech, and high-level a weapon is, the more dangerous it is to its own wielder. If you end up relying too heavily on those high-tech weapons, death will be quick to arrive for you. The best weapons are the ones that appear everywhere. They are easy to deploy and easy to use. For a truly talented assassin, even grass and twigs can be used to take another's life. They had known each other for a full month, but Mantis had always been very taciturn, seemingly treasuring his words as if they were gold. He had never said so many things at once, and Cloudhawk felt as though he was getting to know the man all over again. He was a superlatively talented physician, a strange scientist who liked to dissect corpses and organs in search of mutations. He was also an incredible apothecary who was able to extract fluids from various mutated plants and use them to create medicinal salves, but it seemed as though all of these things were just his secondary professions. Slyfox was a gunner, Mad Dog was a warrior, while Mantis was an assassin. Perhaps Mantis' evolutionary metapowers weren't as high-class as those of Slyfox or Mad Dog, but assassins didn't necessarily need to be the strongest individuals around. They were, however, the most dangerous. Cloudhawk would rather piss off a madman like Mad Dog or a crafty bastard like Slyfox than a viper like Mantis. Cloudhawk unconsciously mimicked the scalpel-tossing motion. What type of training do I need to do if I want to reach your level? Your task for today is completed. Leave. Mantis began to put away his tools without even looking at Cloudhawk. And take your gun. Cloudhawk had been feeling rather irritated, but upon hearing the last few words he nearly leapt for joy. Mantis might seem like an icy fellow, but he was actually quite warm-hearted. Not only had he kept Cloudhawk's weapon safe for quite a few days and then returned it to him, he had also taught Cloudhawk a lesson. In the wastelands, firearms and bullets were used as a common currency for barter. You would always be able to use them to trade for food. Afraid that Mantis might change his mind, Cloudhawk immediately grabbed his gun and left. As for Mantis, he continued to focus on dissecting and handling his corpses. From start to finish, his facial expressions had not changed a single time. Upon returning to his room, Cloudhawk pulled out his gun and excitedly rubbed his hands across its surface repeatedly, almost as if he was stroking the hands of a lover. He had never felt as excited as he currently did. Cloudhawk knew very well that bullets were actually even more valuable than firearms. The reason why the majority of the mercenaries did not use firearms was because bullets were too expensive. A pound of mutabeast meat could only buy you 10 or so pistol bullets. Aside from elite marksmen like Slyfox, using guns was a completely impractical and uneconomical decision for most mercenaries. But despite all that, this was still the first valuable possession which Cloudhawk had ever had. Cloudhawk lay there in his bed, his gun by his side. Even though it only held a single bullet, he felt a sense of safety and security with it nearby. Everything was turning for the better. Cloudhawk let out a long, contented sigh. Just as he was about to blow out the candle and go to sleep, he suddenly heard several loud, clear sounds echo in the skies above the outpost. Clang! 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 The sounds completely shattered the stillness of the night. Cloudhawk had never heard this noise before. It sounded almost like a large gong being struck, with each sound both loud and long-lasting. The sudden clanging noises brought a sense of unease to all who heard them. Cloudhawk had no idea what was going on. However, he had been living here in the outpost for more than a month. He was no longer the clueless and rash kid he once was. He carefully pushed open his door to stare at what was happening outside, rather than foolishly charging outside in a blind panic. Black Flag Outpost was a bedlam of commotion. Many men holding torches were running around, and countless cries and startled shouts filled the air. Cloudhawk was able to vaguely make out one particularly horrified, high-pitched scream. A beast wave! A beast wave is upon us! Cloudhawk had been in the outpost for more than a month. He knew exactly what a beast wave represented. A cold chill instantly filled his entire body, and an uncontrollable terror quickly rooted itself in his heart. This was terrible. Bang! His wooden door was suddenly kicked in, and 3 outpost soldiers charged in and grabbed him unceremoniously. What the hell are you guys doing? A beast wave is attacking. All men are required to take part in the defense. Those who shirk from battle will die. The entire outpost was in a state of chaos. The outpost guards were running around everywhere, grabbing everyone they could. All of the men were corralled like a herd of ducks, then split up into numerous temporary squads. Cloudhawk wasn't even given a chance to explain, nor would any explanations have mattered. The Tartarus Mercenary Company was an important part of the outpost's combat forces. They would undoubtedly be sent to a place even more dangerous than this place. And so, Cloudhawk just allowed himself to be conscripted into a squad of roughly 200 people. A series of clanking sounds rang out as a guard dressed in a full set of steel armor walked over towards them. He was dressed in at least 2 or 3 layers of leather armor underneath the steel, and he wore a half-dot mask that served as a breathing apparatus. The other guards all stood by his side, with this young elite guard who was dressed in a perfect set of armor clearly being their leader. "I'm Lane, the captain of this squad and a member of the elite guards of Black Flag Outpost. I'll be responsible for commanding your group in defending against the attack." Captain Lane spoke with great difficulty, as though every single word was extremely taxing for him to say. It was almost as though someone had thrown a lever into his mouth, making it difficult for him to speak. There was an extremely deep scar on the side of his neck, most likely, the wound that had caused that scar had impacted his vocal cords. "Right now, a large number of mutabeasts are launching an attack against our outpost. All of you, pick up your weapons and protect our home. Fight them to the bitter end." Captain Lane's hoarse voice rang out like the cry of an owl in the night, causing the listeners to shiver with fear. Book 1, Chapter 18 Wolf Pack. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The fire pots had all been set alight, and Black Flag Outpost was thoroughly illuminated by lamps and torches. Terror swept through the entire outpost like a tempest, spreading from person to person like a plague. The sounds of sobbing and screaming could be heard everywhere as the terrifying beast wave drew closer and closer. Beast waves. They were the most terrifying natural disasters which existed in the wastelands. This was a unique type of battle for survival which only wastelanders would ever encounter, a battle launched by large numbers of hungry mutabeasts against the outposts where many humans were gathered. Cloudhawk had just arrived here a month ago, and so he had naturally never experienced one of these beast waves personally. And yet, he had heard some stories regarding beast waves from the older mercenaries. Supposedly, the vast majority of human outposts in the wastelands ended up being destroyed by beast wave outbreaks. Each beast wave portended a calamitous baptism by blood. Even if the attacked outpost was strong enough to resist the beast wave, it would still suffer heavy losses and rivers of blood would form. Was Black Flag Outpost going to suffer this same fate as well? An atmosphere of terror and despair pervaded the outpost. Even Cloudhawk felt rather nervous. He had never experienced a calamity like this before, and he had no idea as to what he would be facing. Just as everyone's hearts were in a state of disarray, a series of frenzied growls could be heard rumbling outside in the wilderness. It sounded like a rumbling landslide, like waves crashing against the shore. The terrifying sounds represented pure bloodlust, madness, and brutality all joined together and then unleash in a single tidal wave of noise. The spiritual pressure they brought alone was enough to shake even the deepest parts of one's soul. What sort of terrifying creatures could possibly make such hideous sounds? Cloudhawk stared from his position in the walls, and he was able to vaguely make out something. A large number of short, stooped black figures were advancing at high speeds under the moonlight. They had pairs of dark green eyes that blazed like abyssal fire, and they brought a completely different aura to the biting cold of the night. What in the world were these things? Just as Cloudhawk was wondering this question to himself, one of the bow-wielding outpost archers who was standing with bow drawn in one of the archery parapets let out a terrified shout. "Oh, shit! Rot wolves! Fuck. I can't even count the number of rot wolves." Every single outpost soldier was a carefully selected elite warrior. They were reliable in both personal power as well as mental fortitude, but when faced with such a terrifying sight even people as strong as them couldn't help but quaver when they spoke, revealing the horror that they felt. As for the squads of irregulars, they were even more terrified. The wastelands are filled with those rot wolves. Oh my God, we are all doomed. There's no way we can beat that many rot wolves. Everyone, run for your lives. The motley crew of irregulars captained by Lane almost immediately began to break down. Rot wolves were enormous mutant wolves that roamed the wastelands, and they were named that way because their flesh was so putrid and poisonous that there was no way to consume. Most normal mutabeasts weighed around 80 kilograms, but rot wolves didn't seem to have an upper weight limit. There had even been sightings of enormous rot wolves that weighed 500 or 600 kilograms. These particular mutabeasts were not only brutal, they were also extremely crafty. Every ordinary Rotwolf would be a match for 2 or 3 ordinary outpost guards in power, but tonight at least 700 or 800 Rotwolves had already appeared. Things were looking very grim. No one knew how many more Rotwolves were lying in wait. Even if there really were just 800, it would be a calamity for the outpost. Captain Lane had clearly never expected for the situation to be this grim either. His face paled slightly, and his sword-wielding hand was starting to tremble, but he still spoke out in his hoarse voice to calm his men. Just a few hundred wolves, while we have several thousand warriors. The hell are you all afraid of? Man up. But who could possibly maintain their calm in a situation like this? Although the outpost held thousands of warriors and was protected by a defensive perimeter, who could guarantee that front-line soldiers like them would be able to survive? More and more soldiers started to move to flee. Archers. Captain Lane was able to tell that the situation was about to spiral out of control. He immediately lifted his sword high into the air, and the 6 archers behind him immediately drew their bows. The archers on the watchtowers all turned towards him as well. Kill them. Cloud Hawk could clearly hear the bowstrings twanging. The first wave of arrows weren't aimed at the beasts outside, they were actually aimed at the fleeing warriors within the outpost. Twang! 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 Several fleeing soldiers let out miserable cries as they fell to the ground. As for the archers, they once more knocked their bows and aimed the cruel arrowheads towards the others. That's what happens to deserters. Captain Lane's hoarse voice rang out in everyone's ears. If Black Flag Outpost is destroyed, do you really think you'll be able to find another place to live? Hell, without Black Flag Outpost, will any of you even be able to survive these wastelands? Pick up your damn weapons. We live or die with the outpost. Faced with those taut bowstrings, everyone had no choice but to acquiesce silently. As for Cloud Hawk, he felt a degree of respect for Captain Lane. He truly was a valiant and charismatic warrior, and his words were spot on. Once Black Flag Outpost fell, would they ever be able to find another place like it? He might not love this place, but this wasn't the time to leave it. He'd rather die than end up a wasteland scavenger once more. Cloud Hawk tightened his grip around his short sword. He had decided to defend the outpost to the bitter end. Captain Lane's methods proved to be quite effective in quelling the chaotic situation. He split up the regular soldiers and inserted them throughout his troops, as he knew exactly how unreliable his irregulars were. Not only could his regular soldiers help to smooth out the average level of strength in each section, they would also be able to serve as his supervisory sergeants once battle began. The wolf pack was moving closer and closer to the outpost. The night was filled with their long, drawn-out howls. Even the earth was shaking slightly as the crazed, bloodthirsty wolves advanced like a foul wind, and it was as though a dark haze had appeared around the hearts of the men who saw them. L.RG, they are about to attack. Shoot them. Shoot them down. The wolves in the pack were actually quite dispersed. Several of the agility metahumans in the vanguard were the first ones to act. Cloud Hawk immediately heard a few sparse gunshots blasting out in the night air, accompanied with the whistling howls of arrows being shot out. Quite a few agonized howls emerged from the wolf pack. Apparently, a number of the rot wolves had been hit. However, attacks on this level simply were ineffective in serving as a deterrent. In fact, when the beasts smelled the blood and pain emanating from their fellows, they seemed to be spurred into an even greater frenzy. The howls of the wolf pack only grew increasingly fierce. The battle was about to erupt. Captain Lane commanded his soldiers, fire in volleys and don't stop. Rotwolves don't have wings. Keep them outside our perimeter. Cloud Hawk was extremely tense. It was just a group of wild animals, right? Nothing bad would happen. Nothing bad would happen. The outpost had sturdy defenses and had countless experts defending it. It also had. Cloud Hawk wasn't even able to finish his self-comforting thought before a terrified, despairing voice rang out right next to him. Look! The skies. What's that in the skies? The moonlight was being blotted out by what looked like storm clouds. When Cloudhawk unconsciously lifted up his head to stare into the skies, his irises immediately shrank. No, those were no storm clouds. Those were teeming masses of flying creatures who were moving at incredible speeds. Cloudhawk was only able to see countless pairs of red eyes flashing in the night sky. Judging from their silhouettes, he could just barely tell that they seemed to be enormous bat-like creatures. Just as the wave of rot wolves hit the outside perimeter, the strange winged creatures dove down from the skies like a tidal wave which could not be defended against. They struck down like thunderbolts upon the outpost guards, and they also struck like thunderbolts against the outpost morale. Danger. Lie down. It was unclear as to who called these words out, and it didn't really matter. Anyone who encountered a situation like this would almost instinctively lie down. Cloudhawk felt as though a gale blew past his head, and the entire world seemed to be filled with the sound of flapping wings. Aya! One of the soldiers on the watchtower was knocked into the air. Even as he was falling to the ground, around 20 black shadows flashed past his body and clawed at him with incomprehensible speed, with each tearing away a section of his body. His body seemed to be as flimsy as wet tissue. In the 5 short seconds of his fall, over 20 strips of flesh were torn off his body as bits of blood and gore flew everywhere. He screamed in misery as his blood and flesh flew everywhere, and then he slammed to the ground with a thud. The person landed ahead of Cloudhawk. When Cloudhawk was able to see what he now looked like, he felt a sense of frozen terror within the depths of his very soul. Almost all of the man's flesh was gone, and his ribs were all clearly visible. The organs had been ripped out of his stomach, and his face had been torn asunder as well. He was completely unrecognizable. Possibly because this had happened so quickly, the poor bastard was somehow still alive despite having been absolutely maimed and disfigured. A gurgling sound could be heard from his throat, and his hands and legs were trembling as though he was trying to climb to his feet. A few seconds ago, he was a hale and hearty man. Who could believe that this would happen to him in just a few seconds? What a calamity! The strange, giant bats were circling in the air above the outpost. Each wing was over 1.5 meters long, and they had hawk-like claws and sharp beaks that were as dangerous as razors. The outpost was filled with miserable screams as many people suffered injuries in a twinkling. This was a type of bloodthirsty animal that loved to eat carrion. They often followed the scent of the rot wolf pack. These 2 different types of mutabeasts, however, would not engage in direct combat with each other. Rather, they would generally reach a tacit agreement to jointly attack certain targets. Just as Cloudhawk rose to his feet and took 2 steps forwards, a giant bat dove downwards towards him at high speed, raking at him with those sharp claws. Sensing the impending danger, Cloudhawk once more fell to the ground, and the giant bat scraped right above him. It was raining blood in the area around him, with a few chunks of meat and skin landing every so often. The warriors on the watchtower who were responsible for shooting down the wolves were almost instantly ripped to shreds and broken apart, with all of them dying to the sudden attacks from the giant bats. They were finished. Cloudhawk's heart sunk into despair. With the mutated bats launching aerial raids and disrupting their back lines, there was no way the outpost could mobilize their archers and gunners to attack the wolves from afar. As for the hundreds of powerful rot wolves, once they charged into the outpost they would deliver an absolutely destructive blow to the defenders. What were they to do? What were they to do? Cloudhawk stared at the silhouettes dancing through the chaos. Finally, he understood how weak any individual person was in a war. Not even Sly Fox or Mad Dog would be able to do anything at a time like this, to say nothing of him. Book 1, Chapter 19 The Alpha Wolf. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Several of the wolves in the wastelands raised their heads to let out long howls. This was a signal to launch the full attack. The swarming masses of rot wolves suddenly began to accelerate, as though physical inhibitors inside their bodies had suddenly been unlocked, or as though they were a group of chained beasts who had suddenly slipped out of their shackles. The ferocious black wave of wolves began to launch a true assault on the outpost. The area around the outpost was littered with boulders and ruined tires which were stacked together to form a rampart. In the wastelands, a defensive perimeter like this was considered quite strong. An attack from a few dozen rot wolves would be completely unable to do anything to this outpost, but the problem was that they were facing over 800 rot wolves and an unknown number of giant bats which were circling around them. The outpost defenses were breached in multiple areas almost instantaneously, and many rot wolves poured into the gaps. The entire world seemed to be filled with the sounds of combat, slaughter, screams, and frenzied wolf howls. In order to avoid the giant bats, Cloudhawk was forced to scurry forwards in a crawling position. He could already hear the sounds coming from outside the ramparts in front of him, as a number of rot wolves leapt upon the bodies of their peers to try and clamber up. Soon, they would be able to make it inside. To just lay here would result in certain death. Cloudhawk rose to his feet, wanting to flee backwards, but he didn't even make it 10 meters before 3 rot wolves agilely leapt past the ramparts. Their oily green eyes swept across the men before them, almost like proud lions surveying little white hares that were trembling before them. They bared their saliva-covered fangs, then let out low growls from their throats. Only now did the rest of the terrified soldiers rise to their feet and begin to flee. But it was too late. The rot wolves leapt into the air, pouncing forwards and knocking down quite a few people. Their sharp claws were 5 centimeters long and were as tough as steel nails. Each swipe of their claws was enough to tear a man open from chest to spleen. Die. A particularly valiant guard lifted up his iron warhammer, then smashed it downwards towards the rot wolf's head. This blow was heavy enough to leave a large crater in any boulder, and even the rot wolf hunched over from the force of this blow. However, what no one would have expected was that its brain matter didn't splatter out. Clearly, this creature's skull bone was even tougher than stone. The vicious rot wolf retaliated with a swipe of its claws, and half of the guard's face disappeared. The guard didn't even have time to scream. The rot wolf leapt onto him, knocking him flat and then ripping out his vocal cords and his carotid artery at the same time. This strike tore out half of his throat. The outpost guard's body twitched a few times, then never moved again. The rot wolf was in no rush to feed. It raised its gore-covered snout, then turned its ghostly, oily green gaze towards the others. It was already in search for its next target. Its flickering gaze was filled with wild savagery, and it completely broke the morale of the conscripted irregulars. These beasts were clearly quite different from the wolves of the old times. In speed, strength, savagery, and cleverness, they surpassed the beasts of the old times many times over. Just as everyone was about to retreat, a single person charged forwards. Captain Lane drew out his longsword as he raced forwards. He delivered a vicious kick to the rot wolf's side and knocked the heavy beast flying into the air, then chopped his longsword down against the midair wolf's neck. Not even inspecting the wound, Captain Lane then leapt onto the rot wolf's corpse, used it to launch himself even higher into the air, then stabbed downwards as his sword flashed with cold light. The stab just so happened to pierce all the way into a second rot wolf's eye socket. A wool. The final rot wolf howled furiously as it charged towards Captain Lane. Captain Lane relinquished his stuck longsword, as there wasn't enough time to tug it free. He suddenly fell to his knees and bent all the way backwards, just barely dodging the rot wolf's flying pounce. Ryip. A sharp knife suddenly flew out from Captain Lane's metallic wrist guard. The knife easily cut into the rot wolf's soft underbelly. The momentum of the rot wolf's leap carried it forwards, resulting in an enormous gaping wound being ripped open. A deluge of blood and foul-smelling organs fell out of the rot wolf's body, dousing Captain Lane in gore. Only now did the others calm down. As for Captain Lane, he rose to his feet, panting just a little bit. He stepped onto the second rot wolf's head, then forcibly tugged out his longsword. His entire body was covered with that reeking blood, and he looked like a soldier who had just escaped from the depths of hell. He bellowed hoarsely with his damaged vocal cords, "All of you, fight. Anyone who takes a single step back dies." The captain had just slain 3 rot wolves as easily as chopping through vegetables. His dazzling display of skill and valor managed to rally his men and strengthen their morale, which had truly been at the brink of collapse just now. However, more and more rot wolves began to fly over the walls and press the attack, and every so often the giant bats circling above their heads would swoop down to rip off an ear or tear out an eyeball, or perhaps just rip an entire face off. This battle was an extremely disadvantageous one for Black Flag Outpost. Even Captain Lane ended up receiving a claw strike as he dispatched one rot wolf after another. If it hadn't been for his layers of armor, he would have been disemboweled by that attack. Some of the outpost guards tried to use their bows to shoot down those infuriating giant bats, but they simply weren't able to see clearly enough in the night to make out their targets. The bats themselves were pitch black in color and moved incredibly fast. Not even the finest sharpshooters were able to shoot down more than just a few of them. The outpost's casualties were growing heavier and heavier. These mutabeasts were even more powerful and vigorous than Cloudhawk had imagined them to be, while not every person was as strong or as skilled as Captain Lane. 10 or so people were sometimes able to use long pikes to stab bloody wounds into a rot wolf, but the berserk rot wolf would still be able to tear half of them to pieces before dying. "You are not permitted to retreat. All of you, keep fighting." Captain Lane was on the verge of hysteria by now. As for the outpost guards, they supervised the battle with cold detachment, hacking or shooting to death any who dared retreat. Most of the outpost guards were focused on shooting their bows and firing their guns towards the more distant enemies while commanding the irregulars like shepherds with a flock of sheep. The irregulars were meant to stand up in front and fight the ferocious rot wolves in bloody melee, serving as human shields that used their own blood, flesh, and lives to demand an equal amount from their opponents. This was how war in the wastelands worked. War in the wastelands was like a merciless meat grinder that ground away at the bodies and lives of both sides. Suddenly, a booming sound rang out as a tremendous blow knocked down the nearby walls. An awesomely enormous rot wolf charged in through the gap, and it was roughly twice as large and 4 times as muscular as the other rot wolves. It had to weigh around 400 kilograms, and was almost as tall as an ordinary human being. Its oily green eyes emanated a breathtakingly savage light, and its entire body was covered with long thick fur. It radiated an aura of dominance and power that made it look like a king, and 6 or 7 smaller rot wolves dashed in by its side. Like wolves let into the sheep pen, they began to launch a massacre against the surrounding soldiers. "Oh, fuck. That's an alpha rot wolf." Captain Lane called out loudly, "Give me my gun." Captain Lane accepted a double-barreled shotgun from another guard, loaded the pellets with lightning speed, then aimed it directly at the alpha wolf. Bang! The alpha rot wolf was even more alert and nimble than Lane had expected. It had leapt sideways as soon as Lane had aimed the shotgun, and the pellets scraped by its body and ended up hitting a rot wolf behind it. The alpha wolf was thoroughly enraged by this near-miss, and it let out a howl as it charged straight towards Captain Lane. Captain Lane, however, wasn't unnerved in the slightest. He quickly reloaded for a second shot, then fired again. This time, the alpha rot wolf twisted its head sideways, allowing the pellets to hit it on its back and create a bloody mist. Wounds of this nature were absolutely nothing to something as hardy and muscular as this alpha rot wolf. By now, it was less than 10 meters away from Captain Lane, and all the humans it had encountered in its path had been bulldozed away like refuse. The alpha rot wolf was extremely intelligent. It knew who posed the greatest threat to it, and its goal right now was to eliminate that threat as soon as possible. Its incredibly muscular body suddenly flew into the air as it leapt forwards, its massive woven claws landing on a fallen human and almost instantly caving the man's chest in. Blood instantly spurted out of the fallen man's every orifice as the Alpha Rot Wolf then leapt high into the air as it went straight for Captain Lane, who was only 6 meters away by now. Even Captain Lane's face tightened as he assessed the situation before him. He immediately tossed away the shotgun, then pulled out the long sword he had planted into the ground. By now, the Alpha Rot Wolf was right in front of him. If he let himself be knocked down, he would be finished. Captain Lane hurriedly retreated, then stabbed forward with all of his strength. The Alpha Rot Wolf used its massive claws to slap at the blade of the sword, which instantly split apart. The snapped blade of the sword went flying off into the distance, eventually stabbing into the body of the poor bastard the Alpha Rot Wolf had just stepped on earlier. As for Captain Lane's right hand, it could no longer really be considered a hand. His fingers were all badly mangled from the force of that collision. The Alpha Rot Wolf was simply unimaginably strong, a single blow from its paw had actually warped all of the fingers on Lane's right hand. Captain Lane, however, was an old soldier who had experienced many battles. Even though he had suffered a heavy injury and was in intense pain, he didn't lose his fighting spirit. In the same instant that his sword was shattered, he used his left hand to pull out a dagger. As the Alpha Rot Wolf leapt towards him, he delivered a vicious straight stab with that knife and managed to stab the Alpha Rot Wolf right in its left eyeball. He then gave the knife a slight twist, resulting in a large amount of blood and jelly pouring out of the wound. Awoo! The Alpha Rot Wolf let out an agonized howl. This sight gave a tremendous boost to the morale of the other soldiers, and they all let out excited roars in response. However, no one foresaw what was about to happen next. The Alpha Rot Wolf suddenly spat out a green, mist-like substance from its body. The Rot Wolf was simply too close. There was no chance for Captain Lane to dodge whatsoever. The thick green mist instantly covered Captain Lane's entire body, and he immediately let out an absolutely inhuman scream. His hands, his face, his exposed flesh, all of it seemed to have been scalded by boiling water. Every inch of his skin instantly turned beet red, and then the flesh began to fall off of his body as though someone was tearing at his skin using a cheese grinder. His eyes were instantly blinded by that fiery mist, and when he accidentally inhaled that powerful corrosive substance into his body, it spread throughout his mouth, nostrils, and lungs. It was almost as though someone had poured boiling water into his throat. Bloody bubbles were popping out of his mouth. Even his tongue was rotting away. Just a few moments later, his entire respiratory system had been completely destroyed, as had his vocal cords. He was now no longer able to even scream. He was a valiant, steely warrior, but no miracle would suffice to address an attack like this. The Alpha Rot Wolf opened its mouth wide, then gripped Captain Lane's head in its jaws. Captain Lane's 4 limbs were still frantically struggling when... crunch! The Rot Wolf bit through his head as if it was just a rotten tomato. His head transformed into a large glob of blood and gore. One of the elite warriors of the outpost, a famous expert of Black Flag, had died a miserable death in the hands of this Alpha Wolf. This time, it wasn't just the irregulars who were panicking. Even the outpost guards were broken. The Alpha Rot Wolf still had that dagger plunged into its left eye, but it remained as savage and brutal as ever. It turned and then spat out that deadly green mist once more, this time with some brain matter and gore mixed into it. Quite a few people were within range of its attack, and agonized screams once more began to echo throughout the area. One Rot Wolf after another began to charge out past it, leaping towards the humans. By now, none of the people present had any will to fight at all. Their sole source of support, Captain Lane, had perished. This meant that the battle here was destined to become a completely lopsided one, an absolute hell for the humans.